Chapter 01. Theon, don't sleep anymore. The king is coming today. Get up quickly. A boy's voice sounded in his ears, and Theon began to activate his mind in a trance. Once his brain was fully engaged, Theon sat up abruptly, and fragmented memories appeared in pieces. There was no throbbing headache, but some memory fragments naturally emerged. Theon Greyjoy, the Starks, the North, the king is coming. Game of Thrones. As a fan of short videos, he naturally watched many Game of Thrones fan edits. Among them, the character Theon Greyjoy left a particularly strong impression. Theon. Huh. I was thinking about something, Bran, Theon replied. Then hurry up and get up, father is calling us. Watching Bran's back as he walked away, Theon took a deep breath twice, suppressing the inner fear and excitement. Theon Greyjoy. I am Theon Greyjoy. Theon repeated to himself several times, accepting his new identity. There was no way to refuse it. As a true man, you must possess this mental strength. Theon dressed quickly and left through the door. Theon is located in the north, one of the 7 kingdoms. The ruling family is the Stark family, and their sigil is the giant direwolf. The current lord is Ned Stark, and Theon Greyjoy, his adopted son. Although he is adopted, he is essentially a hostage from House Greyjoy of the Iron Islands. Theon's father, Balon Greyjoy, Lord of the Iron Islands, led a rebellion during King Robert's reign. In the end, the rebellion was suppressed by Robert and Ned. Balon's 2 eldest sons died in battle, and his youngest son, Theon, was taken back to the north by Ned Stark as a hostage. In the original book, Theon's life can be summarized simply as that of a prodigal son, whose life was full of various tragedies, or in other words, his tragedy was sealed when Balon rebelled. The cold wind blew across Theon's face, and he rubbed his cheeks hard. This will never happen again. What worries Theon most now is the three-eyed raven. As a being who can travel through time, the three-eyed raven has the ability to influence a person's will and thoughts. The system is loading and the energy is insufficient. It started collecting power from the gods of the world. Collection completed. World level detected is too low, a new member gift pack has been sent. The system is disconnected. Disconnection complete. I wish you a good journey. Goodbye. In just 3 seconds, Theon understood what was happening. With a thud, Theon knelt on the ground. No. At that time, snowflakes were falling, and the cold winds blew in the north, but they were not as cold as Theon's heart. When the system first loaded, Theon had been overjoyed, but the subsequent disconnection from the system dealt him a fatal blow. Usually, there's nothing good in the newbie gift packs, but it seems that the system had received divine power, and maybe this was the greatest help for him. At that moment, a light screen appeared before his eyes. It was a gift box. The gift box automatically opened, and 5 orbs of light jumped out. Novice gift packs have been distributed, and then the light curtain suddenly shattered, and a ring appeared on the ground. Theon quickly grabbed the ring and returned home. After looking at it for a long time, he still couldn't understand what was so special about this ring, so he simply put it on his hand. The moment Theon put it on, the ring suddenly disappeared, and 5 illusory light screens appeared before him. They were written as follows. Smaug. A red dragon egg of unknown origin. This is the last dragon egg from a mysterious Middle-earth. It will hatch once you take it, and it will be completely loyal to you, but you must raise it. Snow Wolf Armor. You can summon armor, but it can only gradually enhance the physical fitness of the summoner, with no special abilities or weapons. Elixir of Unknown Origin. The user can gain an ancient and enduring vital lineage, which will not cause any strange changes to you, so feel free to inject it. Disisteresistant Wheat Seeds. A type of high-yield wheat, with good resistance to various natural disasters, such as the cold winter. Perhaps your men won't need to starve in the future. A vibranium sword from an unknown time and space. Maybe it can cut through the shield of a certain hero. Note: you can click on the light curtain to receive items at any time, but once the items are received, they cannot be returned to the light curtain state. Looking at these 5 novice gifts and thinking of the gods being carried away by the system, Theon nearly turned his back in joy. What's this? A great start. If Theon had been thinking about how to change his fate when he woke up, now his mind was filled with thoughts. As a true man, I, Theon Greyjoy, should not be less than others in my life. How can I remain depressed and inferior to others for so long? So Theon couldn't wait to click on the elixir, the Snow Wolf armor, and the vibranium sword. Then, a syringe, a tattoo sticker, and an ancient-looking sword appeared before Theon. Theon grabbed the syringe first and injected it without hesitation. As a warm current spread through his body, he suddenly felt much lighter, and then nothing happened. Isn't it supposed to enhance my physical fitness? Theon rubbed his hand on the vibranium sword, and a cut was instantly made on his finger, but it healed in the blink of an eye. Seeing this, Theon probably understood what this vitality meant. He then took a sticker with a majestic snow wolf printed on it and placed it on his arm. After that, the tattoo of the snow wolf instantly disappeared from his skin. Theon's mind moved, and his eyes immediately emitted a silvery white light. Then, with a roar from the snow wolf, the illusory armor, white as snow, quickly solidified on his body. The special effects were cool, but the actual increase in strength was only about double. For example, Theon's strength used to be 100 kilograms, but now it was 200 kilograms. After retrieving the armor, although the enhancement wasn't great, Theon was very satisfied. After all, the defensive power was there. Even if the enhancement power wasn't significant, it would be easy to handle knights in Game of Thrones. Then he grabbed the vibranium sword, and after much thought, Theon decided to name it Kraken. That name sounds really good and beautiful, at least according to Theon. Picking up the sword, Theon went straight to the blacksmith, intending to make a sheath for it. As for what Bran had said earlier, he had already forgotten everything. Chapter 02. As soon as Theon finished describing the ideal scabbard for the craftsman, Jon Snow appeared behind him. Why don't you go to the inner castle to greet the king? I heard the king has arrived, Jon said. Theon inserted the kraken into the makeshift scabbard and whispered, why don't you go? My surname is Snow. I'm fortunate enough to attend the feast tonight. Snow is the common surname for all illegitimate children in the north. In Westeros, the firstborn inherits the title, and others usually separate from the family, becoming part of another noble house. Illegitimate children are sometimes considered even lower than farmers, and Ned Stark is the only one who treats them kindly. After Theon hung the kraken on his waist, he said, your surname is Snow. What's mine? Stark. Patting Jon on the shoulder, he continued, people should see the essence of things and not be fooled by illusions. Looking at Theon's back, Jon Snow opened his mouth, but said nothing. He always felt that Theon seemed somewhat mentally unstable now. Normally, Theon was the one who looked down on him the most. At the Stark house, Catelyn despises Theon and Jon Snow, and Theon looks down on Jon Snow, even though Ned doesn't treat them any differently. But they all knew their roles. In the original book, Theon chose to attack Winterfell because he was bewitched. In truth, if Theon had behaved himself, even if he returned to the Iron Islands and stayed there, he would have had a good chance of inheriting Balon's position, if his uncle Euron is not taken into account. But in the original book, Theon was so eager to prove himself that he lost his judgment. When Yara wanted to take him back to the Iron Islands, he insisted on staying in Winterfell. Moreover, he is no longer the cowardly Theon. Now, he has the Snow Wolf armor. He was also in no way inferior to the Mother of Dragons. Smaug outshone the Mother of Dragons' 3 dragons in every way. The only question is whether the Smaug given by the system is a new version of the 2-legged dragon or the original 4-legged one. Theon planned to release Smaug after returning to the Iron Islands to gain a position, but if he were discovered after freeing him, Robert would chop off his head immediately. Although Theon now has the serum, if he is facing thousands, if not tens of thousands, of people, it would be disastrous if he were captured alive. As the Spice Lord once told Daenerys, whom she met in Qarth, once said, dragons alone cannot rule the 7 kingdoms. Though Theon's circumstances are much better, it is still not the right time. Chaos is the ladder to climb. Theon slowly arrived at Winterfell's inner castle. As he looked at the stone castle, a sense of familiarity arose within him. But what he felt most was that this kind of age-old architecture was rare in his past life. After passing several layers of inspection by the king's guards, Theon finally reached the inner keep, the central area of Winterfell, which is said to be built over hot springs. Ned and his 3 sons and 2 daughters lived there, while Jon and Theon lived a little farther away but could still enjoy the warmth of the hot springs. At that moment, a large number of servants were tidying up the place in preparation for the feast, while King Robert and Ned sat at the head table, having a pleasant conversation. Looking at the fat king not far off, Theon sighed, thinking about his eventual death. Watching the TV series, Theon never imagined Robert would be killed by a boar. Robert Baratheon, the firstborn son of House Baratheon, was born in the Stormlands and was adopted by the former hand of the king along with Ned. In the end, due to women and various other reasons, they started a rebellion and overthrew the 300-year reign of House Targaryen. This also happened because of the extinction of the Targaryen dragons. The former king was called the Mad King. It is said that every time a child was born into House Targaryen, the gods tossed a coin to decide if they would be a Mad King or a Wise King. We don't know much about the Mad King, but the Boar King in front of us is definitely very different from the one in the original book. Although Robert in front of him is fat, he still looks strong overall, which is quite different from the bloated Robert in the original book. Theon, what are you daydreaming about? Came Arya's lively and sharp voice. Theon looked down and saw the little wolf, Arya. As the woman who ultimately killed the Night King, Theon just wanted to say one thing: the Night King died in a sloppy manner. Why did you run away? Why didn't you join your mother to greet the queen? How boring. This situation suits Sansa more. Oh, her embroidery is perfect. Arya said sarcastically. Ha ha ha, how can a girl wield a sword or a weapon? Your embroidery teacher must be giving you a headache. Arya huffed when she heard and ran off to play. After observing for a while, Theon also turned and walked away. When he stepped outside, a cold, biting wind blew. Damn, why is this place so cold? A voice full of arrogance and disdain rang out. Theon turned his head and saw that it was, in fact, Emperor of all time, Joffrey Baratheon. Or is it Joffrey Lannister? As the eldest son of King Robert, he is actually the outcast between Cersei Lannister and her younger brother, Jaime Lannister. This pair of siblings, known as the Lannister Golden Twins, had 3 children. Joffrey Baratheon, the first in line to the throne, is a monster whose greatest hobby is torturing others. But he is also someone who can be easily used as a weapon. As long as you give him an air of superiority and stroke his ego, he'll do anything at your instigation. Theon smiled and said, Your Highness, I apologize for causing you such an unpleasant experience, but you are also familiar with the weather in the north. So why don't you come with me to the side hall and rest for a while? This could help avoid those bothersome social activities in the cold winter. Also, I met an interesting bard a few days ago. He told me a very interesting story. Theon especially emphasized the pronunciation of, Your Highness, and his perfect demeanor greatly satisfied Joffrey. To be honest, since he arrived here, aside from meeting Lord Stark, Joffrey has been wandering around, and there's also that dwarf uncle who constantly talks and preaches in his ear. Sandor Clegane, the Hound, standing behind Joffrey, asked, Who are you? I am the adopted son of Lord Stark, Theon Greyjoy. Don't worry, I won't harm your highness. Joffrey's martial skills are definitely not comparable to mine. Joffrey slapped the sword at his waist. Dog, do what you need to do. Don't follow me. Then Joffrey gestured for Theon to lead the way, and Theon immediately took Joffrey to his quarters. Theon already had a general plan in mind. The Hound stayed where he was, glaring at Theon's back, and cursed, What a smart and disgusting face. However, the Hound didn't stay long. He went straight to Robert to report the situation. Meanwhile, Theon led Joffrey to his quarters. Theon took the initiative to open the door and said, Please come in, Your Highness. Oh, sorry, I misspoke. Your Majesty, please, come in. Theon quickly corrected his mistake. Joffrey smiled but still reprimanded him, My father is the king. I'm just a prince now. Don't call me that. Joffrey emphasized the word, now. Theon picked up 2 cups and served Joffrey first. Your Highness is right. I was wrong. Theon nearly died laughing. Theon raised his cup and was about to toast Joffrey, but, as if remembering something, he said with a panicked expression, I'm sorry, Your Highness. I've overstepped my bounds. Joffrey smiled and touched Theon, signaling that he shouldn't worry about it. You're my guest. Start telling me your story. It's so boring. Theon took a sip of wine. There's a legend about a mythical country in the east of Essos, surrounded by 6 nations, Theon began. Theon told Joffrey the story of his past life with some minor modifications. Joffrey once said in the original book, We should have an army belonging to the royal family, rather than gathering nobles from across the country when we go to war. All Theon needed to do was encourage a little, plant a seed, and then the war would never end. Chapter 03. The story lasted about 2 hours, and Joffrey was very pleased with the tale told by Theon. In particular, the king of one of the kingdoms had defeated the other 6 kingdoms and established a feudal society. What power was this? If you want to defeat your dwarf uncle, defeat him. Tyrion lay in the arms of a naked woman when he suddenly sneezed, causing him to sigh. He wondered how the northerners could survive in the north. He had no idea that his nephew was already thinking about how to defeat him. Joffrey took a sip of wine. How about being my squire, Theon? Theon was thrilled, the opportunity had finally come. As long as he followed Joffrey to King's Landing, and once Joffrey beheaded Ned, Theon could find an excuse to return to the Iron Islands and ask for help. Of course, Your Grace, it would be my pleasure. Joffrey stood, drew his sword, placed it on Theon's shoulder, and named him his personal knight of the guard. From now on, you will be the knight of my guard, Theon. I expect you to always remain loyal. Your Grace, the sun, the moon, the mountains, and the rivers will last forever, and so will my loyalty. Theon said sincerely, as though he would do anything Joffrey asked. Joffrey sheathed his sword with satisfaction, completely oblivious to what he had just done. Majesty, it's already night. We should go to the banquet. Joffrey nodded. As a prince, he had to attend this banquet. Once they entered the hall, many people looked at Joffrey. After all, the status of a prince was still very noble. In this kingdom, where ancestry mattered, the prince was practically the same as the king. Many people also noticed Theon Greyjoy standing next to Joffrey. Robert looked at Theon and said to Ned, "That guy is smarter than his father. He knows who to turn to." Ned frowned. He had many doubts on his mind. Given Theon's character, was it really impossible for him to kidnap Joffrey this way? But Ned didn't worry too much. Following Joffrey meant that the Iron Islands would follow Joffrey, which could effectively prevent Balon from rebelling in the future. To them, Theon was just a man who knew how to win people's favor, but they didn't know what was going to happen next. But Theon knew. He knew Joffrey would probably behead Ned, and he also knew Stannis would attack King's Landing. At that point, he could return to the Iron Islands openly and then seize the opportunity. Maybe even before that. Instead of being like in the original book, foolishly thinking that occupying Winterfell meant conquering the north. Theon followed Joffrey to Robert's side. Your Majesty. Theon Greyjoy, right. You're smarter than that old Balon. Follow Joffrey carefully, and he won't treat you unfairly, Robert said loudly. Robert was a relatively intelligent man, not as reckless as people thought. It made sense because, how could a reckless and foolish man sit on the Iron Throne and rule the Seven Kingdoms? Don't worry, Your Majesty. I will protect Prince Joffrey, Theon said loudly. Ha 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 ha, all right. Robert laughed joyfully, while wiping the page of a servant at the same time. After Joffrey sat down, Theon stood beside him. The Hound was eating and drinking, but when he saw Theon standing next to Joffrey, he couldn't help but give a sarcastic smile. After mocking in his heart, he continued to drink and eat the kidney pie. The kidney pie in the north was still very fragrant and not as dry as the one made of pork. In the middle of the banquet, Joffrey excused himself from Robert and Ned. Joffrey went to Cersei. Mother, I'm full. I'm going out for a bit. See you later, Lady Catelyn. Goodbye, Your Grace. Joffrey left with Theon, and Cersei proudly said behind him, he's always been so polite. Sometimes I worry if he'll be able to control his nobles in the future. Your Majesty will certainly be a good king. After they left, Joffrey asked Theon, confused, why can't I just leave? Why do I have to ask for permission? Theon sneered inwardly. Why would the vain Joffrey inform others when he leaves? This was something Theon had taught him. Your Grace, just a few words can make all the northern nobles have a good impression of you, which will make it easier to win their support once you ascend to the throne. Why not do it? Joffrey thought for a moment and nodded. That's true. What Theon needed to do now was continue teaching Joffrey how to do things in order to consolidate Joffrey's position. Once Joffrey got used to it, he would seek his advice on everything. The first ideal territory for Theon was the Vale. After the death of Jon Arryn, the Vale came under the control of Lisa Tully. The Vale is rich in resources, easy to defend, and difficult to attack. Additionally, it is close to the sea. Moreover, the ruler there is a mentally unstable woman. It could be said that this was Theon's favorite place in all of Westeros. Your Grace, I heard that hand of the King Jon Arryn has passed away. That old man is really dead. After all, he was so old. As soon as Joffrey finished speaking, a reprimanding voice was heard, that is the hand of the King of the Seven Kingdoms. Perhaps you should show some respect. Theon turned his head and saw a dwarf walking toward him. It was the famous character from Game of Thrones, Tyrion Lannister. At the Battle of King's Landing, we could almost say it was Tyrion's improvised performance that blocked Stannis' attack, and Tywin, who arrived afterward, completed the task. Good evening, Lord Tyrion. Theon greeted casually, without being overly friendly. After all, Joffrey and Tyrion had always been at odds with each other, and Theon needed to deceive Joffrey in order to gain control of the Vale. Hello, the sycophantic knight, as everyone calls you. Tyrion said with a smile. Oh, what a lovely nickname. Theon shrugged, not caring in the slightest. What are you doing here? Joffrey had no good feelings toward Tyrion. Tyrion unbuckled his belt. I'm going to the bathroom. Why not? Joffrey turned with a disgusted expression on his face. Theon, let's get out of here. Theon gestured for Tyrion to proceed and followed Joffrey. At the moment Tyrion was relieving himself, the sound of an argument caught his attention. Uncle, I want to join the Night's Watch. I want to go north. I'm sure of it. Jon, you don't understand how poor people are on the other side of the wall. Your skills are better than Theon's. Maybe you can ask Theon to recommend you. Following Joffrey is your best option. Oh, following Joffrey isn't a good thing. Believe me, no normal person can tolerate our prince. Tyrion approached. Benjen responded. I know Theon, and I see that Joffrey trusts him as well. Jon was also perplexed and said, Prince Joffrey is a well-mannered prince. Everyone at the banquet said so. He will be a wise king. Ha ha ha. Tyrion couldn't hold back his laughter. That shows you don't understand Theon Greyjoy, Tyrion said to Benjen. Then he said to Jon, you don't know my nephew either. It's no use saying that. I've already decided to go north, Jon said with a determined expression. Looking into Jon's eyes, Benjen fell silent for a moment. We'll depart the day after tomorrow, don't forget. Jon let out a sigh of relief. He had been truly worried that his uncle would disagree. He could feel that Lady Catelyn didn't like him. Lady Catelyn was a typical duchess. Her husband had been away with Robert for a year and brought back a boy. It was impossible for her to have any feelings for this child. Hey, I want to go too. I want to pee on the wall, said Tyrion. Benjen didn't refuse, only warning that the wall was very dangerous. Chapter 04. Chapter size, 800 words. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. Today is the day everyone departs. However, even without the three-eyed raven, what is meant to happen will still happen. Bran fell from the tower yesterday. Although he is still alive, he is unconscious. Catelyn was knitting a sweater beside Bran's bed. Jon opened the door and entered. I'm here to say goodbye. I'm heading north to the wall with my uncle. Catelyn's eyes were slightly red. You should have left a long time ago. Her voice trembled a bit. Even though she didn't like Jon, the feelings she had for him over the years were not false. Furthermore, Ned had taken their 2 daughters and Theon south, and Bran was unconscious, so Catelyn couldn't stop crying for a while. Jon stood in silence for a moment before quietly leaving. After Jon was gone, Ned entered, bid Catelyn farewell, and began his journey back to King's Landing. The group split into 2, with a small group of criminals following Benjen Stark back to the wall, while the main force, including Theon, headed back to King's Landing. Next time we meet, you might be the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Jon, Theon joked. Jon smiled in return. Then I'll probably be dead by then. After they shared an embrace, Theon rode off back to Joffrey. Before leaving, Ned also told Jon, even though you don't bear my surname, my blood runs through your veins. The Starks are proud to wear black. Then he returned to Robert. 3 days later. The Night's Watch was an army formed 8,000 years ago to defend against the White Walkers. Back then, the Night's Watch was composed of the elite of various nations, and it represented glory. But now, most of them are criminals from the north. Theon gave Joffrey a general introduction to the Night's Watch. White Walkers are just children's stories. If they even exist, it would be better to capture my uncle. Haha. Joffrey clearly didn't believe in the White Walkers. Now, after so many years, not only the Southerners, but even most people in the North no longer believe in the existence of the White Walkers. The wall is now mainly used for defense against the wildlings. However, the people of the North still hold the Night's Watch in high regard, which sets it apart from the Southern nobility. Theon ate dried food. They would reach King's Landing in a day. The temperature was much warmer than in the North, so everyone wore lighter clothes. When Robert dies, the game will begin. After finishing their meal, they resumed their journey, hoping to reach King's Landing before nightfall. When the last ray of sunlight disappeared, they finally arrived at King's Landing. Looking at the towering walls of the city before them, Theon was still very excited. It was far more shocking than what was depicted in the show, though the faint stench really dulled the senses. As they entered the city, Theon was taken aback by the sight of the poor and emaciated people by the roadside. They were nothing like the poor people he had seen on TV. Each of them seemed as though they had been knocked down by a gust of wind. There was no desire for life, nor fear of death, in their faces. Only numbness and an endless emptiness. It was a tragic sight that Theon had never seen in his previous life. In his past life, he had been born in a poor rural area. While the food wasn't great, at least he had enough to eat. These scoundrels are making King's Landing stink. It would be better to drive them out before winter comes. Joffrey's face was filled with disgust. Your Majesty is right. Theon had a confused expression and looked around at the refugees. They all returned to the Red Keep, and after a night's rest, Ned officially took on the role of Hand of the King the next day. However, Ned was shocked upon accepting it when the treasurer, Baelish, informed him that Robert had a debt of 6 million. What did he do? Ned asked, incredulous. Eat, drink, have fun, and a tournament. Baelish wore an inexplicable smile. Chapter 05. I will speak with Robert tomorrow to discuss this. We can't waste our drained finances on this ridiculous tournament. Ned felt somewhat helpless. The original purpose of the tournament was to help the king select exceptional knights from across the realm. But for Robert, it had become a mere spectacle. The prize for winning the tournament alone amounted to 50,000 gold dragon. Ned then dismissed the small council and sat alone in the hall, a sad expression on his face. The news he received from Robert was that Jon Arryn should have lived at least 5 more years, but he had suddenly died from overwork. Even a fool could tell that things were not peaceful in King's Landing. Robert strongly felt that the Lannisters and the behind-the-scenes manipulators were trying to destabilize the Seven Kingdoms. Theon entered a side corridor not far from Joffrey's chambers. Theon reclined on the bed and looked out at the sea through the window. I must say, the Red Keep is a truly magnificent structure. Facing the sea, one can enjoy the sea breeze every day. Now we just wait for the chaos in King's Landing, Theon murmured, stroking his vibranium sword. Each time the sword cut into his fingers, he felt pain, a reminder that this was no dream. His immortal body meant he would not die, but his senses still existed, and even the enhancement of his 5 senses made him more sensitive to pain. This troubled Theon, as he feared that, after becoming immune to death, he might gradually lose his senses, and eventually, his emotions. Bum bum bum. There was a knock at the door, and a guard entered. Sir Theon, Joffrey requests your presence. Please follow me. Theon sheathed his longsword, Kraken, in its custom scabbard and gestured for the guards to lead the way. Following the winding corridors, Theon finally arrived at his destination. It was an open space with around 30 people standing in the center. Theon, select some people to form a team. I'll soon be 16, and my father has allowed me to have my own team. Joffrey's voice was filled with excitement. Theon narrowed his eyes. It seemed that this was Robert's way of protecting his son. Robert clearly sensed that something was wrong with the atmosphere in King's Landing. Unfortunately, Robert never imagined, until his death, that the storm of chaos began with his own son. You pick 10 people, and the Hound picks 10, Joffrey said. After hearing Joffrey's words, Theon noticed the Hound standing not too far away. Theon then randomly selected 10 people. These individuals were unimportant and likely part of Robert's trusted elite forces, brought from the Stormlands. The Hound, on the other hand, chose 10 people randomly. He simply didn't care. North. Tyrion said firmly, the mind, like a sword, needs to be constantly sharpened to grow wiser. Hearing Tyrion's words, Jon casually nodded twice. Tyrion noticed Jon's indifferent attitude but said nothing more. People with excellent combat skills often ignore the importance of wisdom. For a dwarf, wisdom is especially important. Then, everyone stood up and departed, finally reaching the base of the wall. Looking at the magnificent wall in front of them, nearly 200 meters tall and 600 kilometers long, Tyrion wondered for the first time whether such a structure was really just for defense against the wildlings. Benjen turned and whispered to Jon and his companions, welcome to the wall. Maybe some monsters really do exist. Is such a structure really necessary to defend against the wildlings? Tyrion murmured to himself. Chapter 06. 2 months later. During this time, Ned gradually uncovered parts of the truth, such as the fact that Joffrey was likely not Robert's biological son. And the death of Jon Arryn had definitely been no accident. Ned Stark realized that all the Baratheon descendants had black hair, while Joffrey and his siblings had blonde hair and blue eyes, traits that were typical of the Lannisters. Theon, Lord Stark is outside. Upon hearing this, Theon immediately stood up and went to the door himself. Come in, Theon called to Ned from the other side of the door, leaving the guards outside. Theon poured wine for Ned, likely understanding why Ned had come. I need your help. The death of the former hand of the king is not as simple as it seems, Ned said in a low voice. Theon smiled, showing a hint of flattery, and replied seriously, you are my father. You can always trust your son. Seeing Theon's expression, Ned felt a little more at ease. After arriving in King's Landing, he found that the situation was worse than he had imagined. The treasury was empty, and Robert had disbanded the original standing army. Now, King's Landing was defended by only 5,000 gold cloaks, and it was uncertain how many of them were actually capable of fighting. The situation in the Red Keep was even worse, with nearly the entire castle being guarded by Lannisters. He needed to gather every force he could. How many men do you have now? Ned asked. Theon told him the truth. Father, I have 30 men under my command. The Hound can't lead anyone, so Joffrey assigned all the guards to me. Learning that Joffrey had 30 men under his command, Ned felt a surge of hope. These 30 men are Robert's most trusted. Leave them with me for now. You need to keep an eye on Joffrey. I can't explain everything to you yet, but just wait for my orders. Now, with the 30 elite soldiers under Theon's command, who were from Storm's End, Ned's chances of success had greatly increased. Furthermore, with the 100 elite gold cloaks promised by Littlefinger, once Robert returned from his hunt, he could seize control of the situation in time. Indeed, Robert was 100% determined to send troops to the Lannister family's western stronghold. After explaining, Ned left hastily. Watching Ned's hurried departure, Theon smiled and muttered to himself, my dear adoptive father, even if you don't tell me, I already know what you plan to do. Theon then donned a leather armor and a longsword, walked to the door, and told the guards, take me to see Queen Cersei. Led by the guards, Theon quickly arrived at Cersei's residence. After a brief exchange with the guard, Theon had no trouble finding Cersei Lannister. Looking at the mature and beautiful woman with blonde hair and blue eyes before him, Theon was impressed. Theon Greyjoy, my son's most trusted guard. Why do you come to me if not to protect my son? Cersei might have just finished drinking, or Jaime might have just left. At that moment, Cersei's face turned unusually red. Your Majesty, you should have noticed Ned Stark's actions lately. He has discovered something incredible, and he came to speak to me today. Cersei's eyes, which had been somewhat dazed at first, suddenly became sharp. What did he tell you? Your Majesty, I have prepared 2 letters. Tomorrow, you will give me 500 gold cloaks, along with 50,000 gold dragons. Then, you will allow me to return to the Iron Islands. You see, my last name is Greyjoy. Ha ha. Cersei laughed. What makes you think you can get away with this? I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm merely pointing out the benefits. I hope it gives you some relief, right? Theon continued, and I believe in the strength of the Lannisters. Now I am the sole heir of Balon, as well as the guard to Prince Joffrey. You must have your own plans, but whatever your plan is, it will be difficult to avoid the outbreak of war. When the war begins, no matter how powerful a lion is, it will need allies. Otherwise, it will be hard to protect itself against a siege from fish, wolves, eagles, and stags. Now that I've returned to the Iron Islands, I can attack the north for you at any time and even block the Stark family's return. Your brother Tyrion was captured by Lady Stark. You must be curious why Ned Stark is pursuing you Lannisters. The answers are in the letter. Someone will deliver it to you 2 days after I leave. Cersei narrowed her eyes, deep in thought. Many knew Joffrey's true parentage, but everyone turned a blind eye, afraid of the Lannister family's power. But unexpectedly, Ned Stark appeared and somehow uncovered Joffrey's past. She couldn't understand how Jon Arryn's death connected to her son. Now Theon's terms had made her somewhat tempted. 50,000 gold dragons was a large sum, but not unreachable. After all, she had already lent Robert 3 million. As for the 500 gold cloaks, they were even more dispensable. Finally, there was the war Theon had mentioned. Ned had discovered Joffrey's identity. Once it became public, especially if a lord and the king's brother revealed it, the situation would spiral out of control. Cersei had already arranged for someone to find an opportunity to strike Robert, but the problem now was how to ensure that Ned didn't spread the news first. So, Cersei was eager to learn what Ned Stark had told Theon. As for why Theon had come here to share the secret, it was simply because he was unwilling to be a pawn for the rest of his life. Either way, she was at odds with Robert and Ned, and both of Balon's sons had died at their hands. It seemed likely that she would form an alliance with the Iron Islands. If such an alliance were formed, and war broke out, it would be like a sharp sword that could strike at the North's rear, and the North might never even know. All right, I agree to your terms. I hope what you've said is true. If not, you'll learn what it means to be a Lannister. Debts must be paid. Theon scoffed inwardly. This was the advantage of knowing the general direction of the story. Cersei had no idea that Ned, foolishly, would find her and say, "Take the child and leave quickly." As for the Lannisters, debts must be paid. In Theon's eyes, the outbreak of the War of the Five Kings would inevitably destroy the Seven Kingdoms. By then, the North would be in constant conflict, and the West would be out of reach. Who could stop Theon from growing in power? Chapter 07. Before the dawn of the following day, Cersei sent someone to inform Theon to leave immediately. There were many people in King's Landing, and she didn't want Ned Stark to find out. Theon had the same thought, so he hurriedly left King's Landing with a carriage of golden dragons and 500 golden cloaks. This time, they would spend a week crossing the Westerlands, racing back from Ironman's Bay to Pike. 3 days later, Theon was far from King's Landing and had entered the Westerlands. Cersei hadn't sent any troops to pursue him, indicating she was very satisfied with the contents of the letter. It's also possible that Ned Stark had already asked Cersei for some time to return to the Westerlands, so she wasn't worried at all. Along the way, Theon brainwashed the Golden Cloaks, making them discard their yellow robes and dress in simple, common clothes. Theon couldn't afford to buy leather armor for them. Theon called them the Iron Guard and spent half an hour each day practicing military posture. In this stance, he would attack them, calling them the lowest scum among the Golden Cloaks. But if you follow me, even a punk can become a knight. After many stops and starts, they finally boarded the ship to the Iron Islands. There were 40 ships in total, heading towards the Iron Islands. On the largest ship, Theon was the only one aboard. He was thrilled to see a dragon egg and a box of wheat seeds in front of him. These two things were the key to his victory in the war. Theon tapped the dragon egg, and the 30-centimeter egg immediately cracked open. Snap! A small, red-gold claw extended, and Theon's face filled with excitement as he saw the scene. The four-legged Smaug. Theon was sure it was a front paw, almost certainly the original form of Smaug, not the newer version of the dragon from the films. With an extra pair of claws, its fighting power would definitely be greater than that of a wyvern. Additionally, the forelimbs of Drogon's 3 dragons were just large bone spurs, meaning they could only attack with their hind claws when fighting in the air. As the small dragon crawled out, a golden and red, 4-legged dragon appeared before Theon. A pair of golden pupils in the little head looked at Theon curiously, and a strange mental wave appeared in Theon's brain. "I'm hungry." Theon stared at the young dragon in awe. This feeling was just too magical. "If you're hungry, eat the eggshells," Theon said to the little dragon. After all, this wasn't the setting of a novel, right? Don't eat the eggshells, eat the meat. Ah, Theon clumsily found a cow's leg in the cooking area. When the young dragon saw the cow's leg, it immediately jumped for joy. It didn't need to roast the meat before eating it, like Daenerys, dragon did. Watching the young dragon happily feast, Theon narrowed his eyes into slits. Let's call him Apollo, the sun in the long night, the sun god. Of course, Theon wouldn't name him Smaug, it sounded too ugly. Apollo looked at Theon and then went back to his meal, probably agreeing with the name. 1 day later, the fleet approached the Iron Islands. At this point, about 1,000 people were waiting at the docks. After all, 40 ships could carry between 700 and 800 people, or even more than 1,000. The sudden appearance of such a large fleet would undoubtedly attract attention in Pike. The Iron Islands consist of 31 small islands, including 7 main ones. Among them, Pike Island is the base of House Greyjoy, with the largest port in the Iron Islands, which is also the great port in front of Theon. Theon asked for Apollo to stay alone in the cabin for now. After the ship docked, Theon was the first to disembark, followed by 500 Iron Guards who quickly disembarked and formed a line. The training Theon had undergone in recent days barely made these golden-cloaked men resemble common soldiers. The leader of the opposing team was a fierce-looking woman, somewhat similar to her appearance in the original drama, though more delicate. She looked like a general, if you ignored the fact that her clothes seemed very poor. Seeing the young man who resembled her father when he was young, the Ironborn maiden, Yara, asked in surprise, "Theon. My dear sister, I never thought you'd recognize me." "I'm flattered," Theon replied with a confident smile. Yara was so surprised that she couldn't find the words. Why did Stark let you return? I'm very capable. The wolf's den is no place for me. This is where I belong. Theon said, his smile unwavering. As for his confidence, one of the reasons was that he had unexpectedly called upon the armor again the night before and was surprised to find that the enhancement brought by the armor had grown stronger. In 3 months, it had doubled, and now it had doubled again. Secondly, these were the Iron Islands, and he was the only man in House Greyjoy. In this place, where family and blood are valued, this was the best weapon, even if it was his first time back to the Iron Islands in many years. Looking at her brother, who appeared in good spirits in front of her, and at the well-armed guards behind him, Yara had a confused expression and didn't know what to say. In the original drama, Theon had been deceived by Yara until he met their father, Balon, at Pike. After Yara entered, Theon had even been scolding her for coming in. Sister, take me to Fort Pike. I'm back, and I'm not leaving. Watching the unmistakable ambition in Theon's eyes, Yara couldn't help but wonder if the Lord of the North, Stark, was truly as gentle, honest, and old-fashioned as the rumors claimed. As for that arrogant expression, it was rare for the Ironborn to be so truly arrogant. Come with me, and I'll take you to see my father. The group soon arrived at Fort Pike. Looking at the fort before him, Theon felt it wasn't bad. The Iron Islands were separated from Westeros by the Ironman's Bay. With the continent about to be consumed by war, the Iron Islands obviously held more strategic advantages. The only disadvantage might be that resources weren't abundant. In fact, the soil of Howells Falls Island was quite good. Combined with the soil fertilizer and wheat seeds from Theon, it would surely become a small granary. With the addition of Great White Island, rich in iron, there would be no shortage of food or weapons. All they'd need to do was steal a few blacksmiths. Upon entering the castle hall, an old man with white hair sat near the fireplace holding a letter. You arrived very quickly. Cersei's letter just reached my hands. Theon walked over to the old man and found a bench to sit on. Father, I'm back. You no longer need to worry about the heir to the Iron Islands. Balon stood up and tossed the envelope into the fire. I won't leave my family to a Stark, nor to a wild dog alongside a lion. It seems that Cersei mentioned some conditions in the letter. Is Robert dead? Balon looked at Theon and said, yes, he was killed by a boar. How funny. He deserved it, he deserved it. Chapter 08. Father, you need an excellent heir, someone who knows how to fight, continue the family line, and lead the family towards prosperity and strength, Theon said bluntly. He also knew that Balon, before him, was an ambitious man but extremely self-assured. In the original drama, Yara had already explained that the Balon's method of operating inland was flawed, and that was indeed the case. The greatest advantage of an archipelago is its isolation from the mainland. The Ironborn excel at naval warfare, but their numbers are few, and they are completely incapable of defending any territory if they venture inland. Yara is very capable. She could be my heir, but you are nothing but a Lannister dog now, and you are unworthy of being my heir. Theon replied, talking too much won't help. Being better isn't just about words. Right now, the North is probably gathering its lords to prepare to march south. How about we compare who performs better? Yara raised an eyebrow. She hadn't expected Theon to be so confident, but she wasn't afraid. Balon looked at Theon for a moment and then nodded. Then it's settled. Yara then instructed her servant to arrange a room for Theon, and the 500 iron guards that Theon had brought were positioned not far from the Pike Fortress. That night, Theon freed Apollo from the wooden crate, gave him a few instructions, and let him fly out the window under the cover of darkness. Theon felt no attachment to Balon. In the original drama, Balon himself is a cold-blooded, arrogant, and ambitious man. The only person who cares about Theon is Yara. Yara had even gathered a group of elite soldiers to rescue Theon, but by then, Theon had been tortured to the point of unconsciousness and didn't dare attempt an escape. Although Apollo was a young dragon, he was different from Drogon in his youth. Following Theon's instructions, Apollo reached a window. It was pitch dark inside, with only the flickering light of the fire in the hearth. But Apollo could clearly see Balon in bed. Apollo silently approached Balon's side and bit his neck fiercely. The dragon's hot breath instantly scorched the Balon's throat. Then, he set the wooden bed on fire with a breath of dragonfire and quickly fled the scene of the crime. Soon, the fire spread and was discovered by the patrolling guards. There's a fire. Put it out. Various loud shouts broke the silence of the long night. After the fire was hastily extinguished, the guards found Balon's charred body in the room. Yara looked at the burned remains of her father and immediately suspected Theon. He had just returned for one day, and her father was burned alive. Could there be a more coincidental occurrence? But then the guards reported that no one had entered Pike Castle that night. At the same time, Lord Balon always locked the door from the inside, and Theon hadn't left his room. It was even more impossible for someone to fly over 10 meters and kill Balon through the window. After calming down, Yara realized that Theon couldn't have killed Balon. It seemed the only possibility was that the room had caught fire, and her father died in the flames before he could escape. At that moment, Theon finally arrived. What happened? Was there a fire? After understanding the situation, Theon's eyes suddenly turned red, and he knelt, crying so intensely that anyone who heard him would be heartbroken, and anyone who saw it would cry. Then, Theon requested to personally carry out his father's funeral as Balon's son. Although Yara and her allies were unhappy, there was nothing they could do. After all, Theon's identity was clear, he was Balon's only son. After all, Yara was a woman, and although Yara was recognized by everyone, Balon had never publicly declared her as his sole heir. So now that Balon had suddenly died, according to the rules and laws, Theon was the sole heir unless Yara secretly killed him. This situation was similar to Robert's sudden death. Joffrey naturally became first in line to the throne, not to mention that Theon was his biological son. 3 days later, Theon personally paid 1,000 gold dragons to carry out a funeral for Balon and posthumously named him King of the Iron Islands. This innovative and sincere gesture won the approval of some people. Along with some smaller families that were at odds with Yara, they all reached an agreement and decided to support Theon. Although their overall strength was not as great as the opponents, with the addition of 500 iron guards and the 50,000 gold coins brought by Theon, the difference wasn't significant. After the funeral, Yara took the nobles who supported her to meet with Theon, who was occupying Pike Fortress. The day after Balon's death, Theon stationed 500 guards near the fortress under the pretense of stabilizing the unrest. Theon, Westeros now has 4 kings. This is our chance. In this competition, the one who gains the most in 7 days will win. Each side must help the other become the king of the Iron Islands. How do you fare? Yara said to Theon. Theon seemed confused. What competition? Sister, our father just died a few days ago. Are you really thinking of taking his place already? Theon's words immediately changed Yara's expression, and even some of the nobles who had just arrived looked at Yara in a different light. At that moment, a lesser noble who was protecting Theon immediately stepped forward and said, Lord Balon just passed away, and you, a woman, are already coveting Lord Balon's position. Now I suspect that Lord Balon's death has something to do with you. Furthermore, it was well known that Lord Theon had voluntarily become a hostage to protect the Greyjoy family. Now that he had escaped danger with his own wisdom, he wished to return immediately to the Iron Islands to visit his father. Who would have imagined that he would lose the loved one he had thought about day and night right after meeting her for just one day? And now you are forcing him to compete with you and fight for the title of King of the Iron Islands. I believe Lord Theon is the legitimate and most qualified successor to the throne of the King of the Iron Islands. These words naturally came from Theon. On the other hand, many of Yara's nobles began to waver and distanced themselves slightly from Yara's group. The prototype of the Iron Man is a Viking pirate. The ever-proud Ironborn girl, Yara, had never heard such repugnant words before and, for a moment, she could not refute them. Because even though much of what Theon's men said was simply changing perspectives, it generally made sense and was completely accurate. Theon looked at Yara, who didn't know how to respond, and secretly smiled. Some words could only be spoken by subordinates. If he said them himself, he would likely face moral condemnation. For example, the King of the Iron Islands should be elected, but those words shouldn't be said by the candidates themselves. Theon clapped his hands to silence the crowd, and everyone fell quiet, turning to look at him. Yesterday, I dreamed of my father. The drowned god took me to see him. My father told me that the responsibility of rebuilding the family would fall on my shoulders in the future. I was terrified. I was worried because I wasn't doing well, so my father gave me armor, a gift of iron and salt. The dead never die. Several lesser nobles supporting Theon shouted angrily, the dead never die. The dead never die. The dead never die. More and more people followed suit, but one voice interrupted them, you said you saw your father and that he gave you the gift of iron and salt. Show it to us. If it's true, you are the king of the Iron Islands, brother. Yara skillfully shifted the topic to the armor, the so-called gift of iron and salt. Since armor given by the drowned god should not be an ordinary item, if Theon couldn't present it, it would prove he was a liar. Chapter 09. Everyone stared at Theon, some with indifference, but most with expectation and curiosity. Since the suppression of Balon's rebellion, life in the Iron Islands had become increasingly difficult, and many lesser nobles had resorted to farming in Westeros. Theon looked at everyone and secretly praised Yara in his heart. Then he shouted loudly, "The gift of iron and salt, the dead shall never die." As the words left his mouth, a roar echoed, and a white light like snow appeared in Theon's eyes. A set of armor ceased to be virtual and became real, and in an instant, a set of snow-white armor appeared before everyone. The strong metallic texture, the original black part of the leather cloak turned into dense black scale armor, gleaming with a metallic shine. The stark contrast of black and white stunned everyone. After a moment, everyone knelt to the ground, even Yara knelt on one knee. "King of Iron and Salt, please lead us to restore the glory of the Ironborn." Theon retrieved his armor and ordered his servants to bring forth a massive sand table. This was a simplified sandbox Theon had asked someone to make during the night. Theon took a chess piece in the shape of a wolf's head and placed it in Winterfell. Now that Robert has died suddenly and Ned Stark has been imprisoned, Robb Stark, the eldest son of House Stark, will surely lead an army south. "We can take advantage of the void in the north to launch a surprise attack," said a noble, which was also the idea of most of the Ironborn. Theon placed two chess pieces shaped like stag heads in Dragonstone and Storm's End, respectively. A stag's head was placed in King's Landing, and a lion's head was placed in Harrenhal. When the north marches south, Old Lion Tywin will surely stop the Stark pups in Harrenhal. Similarly, Robert's second and third brothers will not miss this opportunity. "Have you heard that Joffrey is not Robert's biological son? So, what do we need to do?" Yara didn't understand what Theon was talking about and what it had to do with the Ironborn. "We are few in number, with only 5,000 men capable of fighting. While our warriors are brave and fearless, they cannot be sacrificed in vain." After saying this, Theon placed the two sea monster chess pieces between the Riverlands and the north. "The north is vast and sparsely populated. We only need to send 500 people to create enough of a stir, then steal the craftsmen. If they have families, we will also capture them to prevent them from returning home." Everyone wondered, why steal craftsmen? Our blacksmiths are excellent. We don't just need blacksmiths, but also carpenters, masons, woodworkers, anyone with skills, bring them all back. Theon was well aware of the Iron Islands' weaknesses. Not only is food production lagging, but all other aspects are not keeping up with the development of Westeros. In other words, in these 8,000 years, there has been almost no civilizational progress throughout Westeros, otherwise, the gap would be too obvious. Furthermore, the culture of the Ironborn is quite warped. They believe in war and plunder. Throughout history, there have been rulers in the Iron Islands who tried to develop them. Thus, Theon needs to step by step expel the old system from the minds of the Ironborn, and this approach will inevitably result in bloodshed. "But what we need is wealth and food. What use are these craftsmen?" Baker said with disdain. In his opinion, the Ironborn should seize golden dragons, food, and women. Theon's eyes narrowed. "Don't interrupt me when I'm speaking, Baker, or I'll cut you into pieces and feed you to the fish." Baker's family strength should not be underestimated. They can mobilize hundreds of warriors. At Theon's warning, Baker's face flushed red, and he suddenly drew his sword. "Theon Greyjoy, this is the tradition of the Ironborn. Don't think I'll fear you just because you have that armor." The crowd watched the scene unfold but did not intervene. They wanted to know Theon's strength. If Theon wasn't strong enough. A white light flashed, and his body was covered in armor. With a roar, Baker rushed toward Theon first. As the sharp sword came from buckle, Theon neither dodged nor evaded but punched Baker in the abdomen. The enhancement provided by the armor was a complete improvement. Especially for the Snow Wolf, which focused on strength and defense, its defense was self-evident, and its strength was more apparent than the other enhancements. The long sword was useless when it struck the armor, except for the sound of metal clashing. On the other hand, Theon punched Baker and sent him flying several meters away. Chapter 10. Seeing Baker fall to the ground, vomiting blood from a distance, Theon knew he couldn't kill him that way. "Come, take Sir Baker Thorin for treatment. I may have been a bit too harsh." Once Baker was taken away, everyone regained their composure. It seemed that this full-body armor served far more than just defense. "Let's continue." Theon stored his armor and approached the sand table. Baker is right, we not only need craftsmen, but we also need food and golden dragons. But as you all know, the situation in the north is grim, and with the war, there won't be much food. So, our focus should be on the Westerlands and the Riverlands. Theon placed the Lannister and Stark pieces on the chessboard at Harrenhal. They will inevitably get involved here. The Starks want to lead the war in the Westerlands, while the Lannisters will definitely want control of the war in the Riverlands. As for the Tully family in the Riverlands, honestly, they can't even command their own vassals, so they are the perfect target for raiding. Finally, Theon told everyone, in general, we have only 3 objectives: craftsmen in the north, golden dragons in the west, and food in the Riverlands. After hearing this, everyone exchanged surprised glances. They were used to raiding wherever they pleased, but they had never had such a clear strategic goal. They were momentarily lost. Then, they turned their attention back to the new king, Theon. Seeing the confused expressions on their faces, Theon said, I'll assign more detailed tasks tomorrow, don't worry. Just one more thing, everyone. We'll never be strong if we rely solely on pillaging. The best we can do is defend this small area and govern the country. Ladies and gentlemen, there are more ways to steal than just through violence. There are many other ways to make people surrender without a fight. Theon's words caused a stir in the crowd. How could anyone allow themselves to be stolen from willingly? How could someone be so foolish? What we need to do is use this war to gather enough supplies. I'll inform you of the next step when the time comes. For now, all you need to do is gather your family's elite warriors in Pike City. When the meeting ended, it was already getting dark, and Yara was the only one left. It seems you've learned a lot out there, Yara said. Seeing Theon plan his actions in such an orderly manner, she realized that he was better suited to be the king of the Iron Islands than she was. Whether it was in terms of lineage qualifications or personal skill, she could lead the Ironborn more comfortably, but Theon had the potential to take them to a higher level. 3 days later. By then, Pike City had gathered 4,000 people, all of them elite warriors of the Iron Islands. To be honest, Theon hadn't expected there to be so many. The population of the Iron Islands was probably less than 100,000. Theon integrated the 500 Ironborn guards into the 4,000 men and began training them in basic discipline. Otherwise, it could lead to problems in subsequent actions. Fort Pike's Hall. Theon had just formulated a battle plan, and the nobles of the Iron Islands once again learned how cunning a villain could be. This time, there were a total of 4,500 people in the Iron Islands, including the Ironborn Guard, of which Theon led 1,000 men to support the Lannisters. 500 Ironborn guards attacked the northern border, mainly to capture craftsmen. The remaining 3,000 soldiers were divided into 2 groups, under the banners of deserters from the Lannister and Stark families, raiding all the money and food they could find. This was also the first time the Ironborn realized how dirty pillaging could be. Chapter 11. After most situations had been dealt with, Theon was finally able to relax and take care of Apollo. When he first arrived in the world of Game of Thrones, Theon was solely focused on surviving. Later, after receiving a starter gift package from the system disengaged, believing this world's power level to be too low. Eventually, Theon found the right opportunity to leave King's Landing and return to the Iron Islands. Although he wasn't yet familiar with the region, it was at least a more suitable place to use as a base of operations. His tricks may have seemed powerful, but in truth, Apollo and the high-yield food supplies, which could actually influence the outcome of war, still needed time to develop. As for the armor, although it appeared nearly immune to all current physical attacks, its limited offensive capabilities made it unsuitable for large-scale warfare, and it continuously drained the wearer's mental strength. Although the system had absorbed the low-level gods of this world, the tide of magical power was still rising. They could only hope to find a way to cultivate spiritual power in the future. The heart of the Iron Islands was Pike, and the central area of Pike was Fort Pike, located atop a small hill. Theon had now dug a massive cave behind Fort Pike, where he stored all of his 50,000 gold dragons. After all, Apollo was still a dragon. Faced with a sea of gold coins, he was overjoyed and immediately dove into the glittering pile. Watching Apollo, who looked more like a playful husky than a fearsome beast, Theon couldn't help but smile. After all, the dragon couldn't yet be seen in public. Creating a cozy lair for Apollo, one he wouldn't want to leave, was a necessary move. In Theon's mind, dragons were meant to soar through the skies. But perhaps Theon didn't realize just how much Apollo loved caves filled with gold, silver, and treasures, almost to the point of obsession. He told Apollo not to wander too far. Apollo was still just a hatchling. Once he matured into a young dragon, he would no longer need food and would start absorbing magic to continue growing. Before leaving, Theon assigned 200 of his best iron guards to protect Fort Pike. Fortunately, the fort wasn't very large. As Theon departed, Apollo stared after him with a confused expression. He didn't understand why his father didn't live with him in the Golden Nest. But his father had done his best for him, even giving him such a beautiful room. After leaving, Theon gathered the remaining 300 iron guards. You will be the last to leave. Wait until the northern army passes through the twins, then begin your movement. Someone will notify you when it's time. Once his preparations were complete, Theon went to find Yara. There were still many fertile lands outside Pike, and the Ironborn hadn't abandoned agriculture entirely. After all, they couldn't survive on raiding alone. Sister, take 1,500 men westward. Watch for the right moment to strike, don't act recklessly. I'll send word when the battle begins. Don't forget to fly the Stark Wolf banner and pose as deserters. Yara nodded. Her mission was vital, and if it were exposed, it could cause serious problems for Theon. Putting her in charge of the task was a clear display of his trust in her. The original plan was to gather 1,500 men from the Riverlands and Westerlands, but Theon later realized these armies only fought when there was loot to be gained. Therefore, he only needed to send 1,500 men and 300 iron guards into the western and northern territories to seize gold and skilled craftsmen. That way, Theon would still have 2,500 men ready to participate directly in the war. But he wasn't in a hurry. He estimated that Joffrey was about to execute the Old Wolf. Once Ned Stark was dead, true chaos would follow. By then, Cersei Lannister would surely write to him, begging for help to defend King's Landing. Indeed, 1 week later, Theon received a raven from the capital. After reading the message, he tossed the letter into the fireplace. Joffrey had a brilliant idea. He executed Ned Stark during the trial. Now is our chance. Yara, the Westerlands are now yours. The amount of gold you seize will determine our future development. Don't worry. I'll do my best. King of Salt and Rock, please trust me. It was the first time Yara publicly called Theon the King of Salt and Rock. Though he hadn't officially claimed the crown, more and more nobles were starting to refer to him as king. But Theon wasn't in a rush to seize the throne. As their ancestors once said, build high walls, stockpile grain, and become king slowly. With the War of the Five Kings about to erupt in Westeros, it was the perfect time to store supplies. Everyone packed up and split into 2 groups. It took Theon 10 days to reach King's Landing. With his arrival, the tense atmosphere in the capital noticeably lightened. After all, Theon was clearly an ally. And one more ally meant one more chance to defend the city. Without that, once the city fell, there would be fires and looting. With his troops stationed outside the Red Keep, Theon and a few guards made their way to the throne room to meet with Cersei and Joffrey. When they arrived, the hall was nearly empty, just a few people, along with some guards. Your Majesty. Your Grace, the Queen. Cersei looked up at Theon Greyjoy's arrival and let out a subtle sigh of relief. If Theon had stayed hidden in the Iron Islands, the Lannisters might have been powerless against him by now. Joffrey wore a smile as well. Ever since Theon had left, he'd been stuck with that annoying hound again, which had become a source of endless boredom. Amid all the recent unrest, he also had a vague sense that things were beginning to spiral out of control. He hadn't expected that his loyal guard Theon would return at this moment, bringing more than 2,000 soldiers to protect him. Joffrey rose cheerfully and exclaimed. What did I say? Sir Theon, no, 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 Lord Theon would definitely return with troops to help. You didn't believe me. Petyr Baelish Littlefinger frowned, casting a long look at Theon Greyjoy. He couldn't understand why this little sea monster had shown up with 2,000 men. Because, by all accounts, the situation was grim. Renly Baratheon and the Tyrells had 80,000 infantry and 20,000 cavalry in the south. An additional 10,000 troops from the former royal fleet at Dragonstone bolstered the eastern naval forces. The only possible strategy was to hold King's Landing until Tywin could crush the Northern Alliance, then return south to repel both the southern forces and the eastern fleet. From that perspective, Theon's arrival looked like a suicide mission. But Petyr knew Theon was a player, just like him. He'd been watching Theon closely ever since he entered King's Landing, trying to figure out his motives. Given everything Theon had done, especially betraying his adoptive father, Ned Stark, in exchange for a chance to return to the Iron Islands, Littlefinger had assumed he would never come back. But shortly after Theon returned home, the old sea monster, Balon Greyjoy, mysteriously died, burned alive in his chambers. After Joffrey's remark, Theon drew his sword and knelt. I, Theon Greyjoy, pledge my loyalty to your majesty. Tell me, who said I wouldn't return? I will challenge them to a duel. Joffrey quickly waved his hands. It's fine, Lord Theon. The gold cloaks are yours to command. Everyone in the hall was stunned at Joffrey's impulsive decision. Your Majesty, no. Cersei quickly stepped forward to stop him. Perhaps compelled by something deeper, her voice carried a tone of sharp rebuke. Joffrey turned toward her, his expression darkening. I'm the king. Were you just scolding me? Realizing that she had just embarrassed Joffrey in front of others, Cersei quickly recovered and replied. Your Majesty, Lord Theon only just arrived in King's Landing. He's not yet familiar with the situation. Perhaps it would be wise to give him time to understand the current state of affairs first. Then, throwing a meaningful glance at Theon, she added. What do you think, Lord Theon? Theon understood exactly what Joffrey wanted and immediately played along. I've always said I'll remain loyal to His Majesty Joffrey. Whatever His Majesty commands, I will obey. Pleased with this answer, Joffrey nodded. In that case, the command of 5,000 gold cloaks is yours, Lord Theon. Don't disappoint me. Your Majesty can always count on Theon Greyjoy. At that moment, Esser Mandon Moore could barely suppress a smirk. You're just handing him the gold cloaks like that. Meanwhile, Theon was fully aware that many of the gold cloaks would likely pretend to obey while secretly resisting. But that didn't matter to him. Most of the gold cloaks were commoners. The knights and noble officers numbered fewer than 2,000. Theon's plan was simple: recruit the elite among the commoners and mold them into his own private force. Chapter 12. Joffrey glanced at Cersei with a smug expression, then looked down at the silent ministers below, feeling even more arrogant inside. Although Joffrey was cruel, he was not a fool. In the face of the ministers' disobedience, he understood deep down that the true power of the king's position belonged to his mother. Now, Theon's sudden appearance made him feel a sense of real authority. The feeling of being feared by everyone was intoxicating to him. He relished hearing others scream and seeing their fear. Cersei glared at Theon in anger, but Theon pretended not to notice. Often, when a general appeared in court to support a powerless king, it meant a political struggle was about to begin. Theon's plan was to rely on Joffrey and use him to increase his own power. The meeting ended, and Theon met with Joffrey privately. Your Grace, it's far too dangerous to rely solely on 5,000 gold cloaks and 2,500 ironborn against a siege of nearly 100,000. We must recruit more soldiers. Recruit. But Petter says there's no gold in the treasury, Joffrey replied. He wanted to renovate the palace. Your Grace, I'll find a way, but I need your permission to expand the army, Theon said, revealing his true intention. Joffrey waved his hand. Do your best. The more defenders, the better. As you command, Your Grace. Gaining Joffrey's approval was as good as receiving official sanction for recruitment. After leaving, Theon immediately led his men into the slums. Select men in their 20s among the refugees, preferably those in good condition. For these refugees, even a single porquality meal a day was enough to make them work hard. Theon planned to recruit 400 men every 3 days to keep the numbers manageable and ensure easier control and indoctrination. Too many at once would be difficult to handle and could easily cause chaos. He didn't allow the new recruits to eat their fill. They received only 2 meals a day, each half-sized. Those who performed well could eat until they were about 80% full. This way, they would quickly grow accustomed to following orders. In any case, they would not be sent to fight outside the city just yet. Given the current situation, Stannis would likely use shadow magic to assassinate Renly within a month or 2. By then, House Stark would have finished gathering its forces, and both Renly Baratheon and Stannis Baratheon would already have assembled their armies. At present, the 4 kings were still watching and waiting, in no rush to act. The first to move, however, would certainly be House Stark in the north. After all, they were the only ones whose lord had been executed. The other 3 kings were fighting over the Iron Throne within House Baratheon itself. At least in name, Joffrey still bore the Baratheon surname. Once the recruits were assembled, Theon led them to his own camp. Rube Segovia, these 400 men are in your hands. He gave a few more instructions and left quickly, only after making sure Rube understood exactly what he wanted. Back at camp, Theon finally relaxed. He had been rushing all day without rest and was completely exhausted. He slept straight through to the next morning. After rising and washing, Theon went to the Red Keep. Naturally, Theon had an office assigned to him. Though only a temporary side chamber, it was not small, just rather plain. He took up the roster of the gold cloaks and began preparing to inspect them. While he was selecting a gold cloak of common birth, Petyr Baelish appeared at the door. Knock, knock, knock. Enter. Baelish pushed open the door. Lord Greyjoy, good day. When Theon saw who it was, he was delighted. Was this not the coin purse he had been waiting for, delivered right to his door? He rose quickly and pulled over a stool for Baelish. Please, have a seat, Lord Baelish. I was just about to come looking for you, Theon said with a smile. Littlefinger and Theon sat facing each other. I've heard the Lord is planning to recruit soldiers, is that right? Forgive me, but with all due respect, our treasury. Lord Baelish, I recall the harvest was just brought in. Surely food is not in short supply, is it? Littlefinger gave a helpless look. The food and taxes we receive are limited. Now that war is about to break out, most of the grain and levies remain in the hands of the nobles themselves. And while there is food enough, there are only a little over 20,000 gold dragons left, Littlefinger added. Theon leaned back strategically, his brows furrowed. Littlefinger regarded him with a wry smile, as if waiting to see whether Theon had a clever solution to the problem. Theon suddenly smiled. Lord Baelish, what if you helped me expand that treasury of gold dragons? A smile never truly vanishes, it merely shifts. Littlefinger's froze abruptly. He had not expected anyone to be so brazen. My lord, though I am master of coin, I cannot conjure a gold dragon out of thin air. Theon rose suddenly and walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. But I've heard your brothels are overflowing with coin, are they not? My lord, Littlefinger began, but Theon cut him off. Lord Baelish, let us set that aside for the moment. I've just remembered something else, Theon said as he crossed to the window and shut it. The room grew markedly darker. For the first time, Littlefinger felt a twinge of unease. For an instant, he even wondered whether Theon's intentions were of a personal nature. Theon leaned back in his chair, resting his chin on one hand, his tone and gaze filled with scrutiny. I've heard that the deaths of the last two hands of the king may have had other causes. How much, I wonder, does Lord Baelish know about that? Ah yes, of course, we could always ask Lady Lisa Tully. After all, she loves you dearly and would do anything for you. At Theon's words, Littlefinger's heart raced, though outwardly he feigned innocence, insisting he knew nothing and that he and Lisa Tully were nothing more than childhood companions. Theon simply crossed his legs and stared at him. After a long pause, he continued, chaos is a ladder, Baelish. But you must also remember, if you fall too far into chaos, it becomes what Varys once called it, an abyss that swallows everything. You have a choice, spend the coin to avert disaster, or tumble into the abyss. I know more than you think, my lord. Cold sweat broke across Littlefinger's brow. He truly did not know how much Theon had uncovered, but from what he had seen, it seemed far too much. 100,000 gold dragons. Will that suffice? Baelish's voice trembled, as though he were bleeding himself dry. 1 million. That's impossible, I don't have that kind of coin. If Cersei and Lord Tywin were to discover it was you who planted the Valyrian steel dagger to frame. Let us discuss this, Baelish interrupted quickly. Chapter 13. After much bargaining, Theon finally extorted 200,000 gold dragons from Petyr Baelish. Of course, these coins would not be used to expand the army, but would instead go straight into Theon's own pocket. As for Littlefinger exposing him, Theon knew he would never be foolish enough to reveal such a deal. Littlefinger's heart bled as he returned home. His total assets were worth less than 500,000 gold coins, and he had planned to use them to raise an army and secure a fief in the future. Yet before he even managed to obtain that fief, half his fortune had already been extorted by that beast, Theon. After dismissing Littlefinger, Theon had originally planned to meet with Varys, but his intentions were interrupted by the sudden arrival of Sansa. Theon, please save me, Sansa pleaded as soon as she entered. At that moment, Sansa had no idea Theon had betrayed her father. Very few people knew the truth. It was not the kind of matter that was too small to matter, nor too large to ignore, but it was significant enough. After all, few would ever choose to trust an obviously ambitious hostage, yet Ned Stark had believed in him. And even if Theon had not betrayed Ned, the man would likely have met the same fate. The main substance of Theon's agreement with Cersei revolved around Lisa Arryn in the Vale accusing the Lannisters. Sansa, calm yourself. Theon quickly embraced the key to the north. No, it was Sansa. I want to save you, but King's Landing is in chaos. I must secure my own position first. Stay here for now, will you? Sansa nodded helplessly in Theon's arms, then wiped away her tears and left. Theon watched her departing figure, already plotting how to persuade Joffrey to marry her to him. Such a marriage would grant him a legitimate claim over the north. In Westeros, there are two types of rule. One gained by violent conquest, which after 2 or 3 generations becomes grudgingly accepted, and the other secured through lawful inheritance. In most cases, Theon preferred the second path, for the cost of conquest was far greater. Over the next 6 months, Theon recruited 2,000 refugees into his army. At the same time, he absorbed 1,500 gold cloaks with clean records, who quickly fell under his command. With this, Theon's forces swelled to 6,000 men. While their overall combat effectiveness remained questionable, their numbers alone gave him strength. They fed on King's Landing's resources, but the refugee soldiers were grateful to Theon. A considerable portion of the original gold cloaks were battle-tested veterans, and many were promoted to squad leaders, a rare advancement for men of their background. In contrast stood Janos Slynt, a despicable man notorious for his greed. He sold positions within the city watch and frequently withheld pay from common gold cloaks. Nearly half the wages of 3,000 men were skimmed off by him, a testament to his avarice. At the same time, he had aligned himself with Cersei and became part of her faction. Theon had noticed him the moment he arrived in King's Landing, not only because Slynt had betrayed Ned Stark in the original plot, but also because of his arrogant manner toward others. It was truly loathsome. Still, Theon expected Janos to soon come knocking at his door, for by taking nearly 1,500 gold cloaks under his command, he had halved the protection fees Slynt had been collecting that month. My lord Theon, His Majesty has summoned a meeting of the council and invites you to attend. Very well, I am on my way. When Theon arrived at the small council, everyone was already seated, including Janos Slynt, commander of the city watch. Cersei was there as well, her expression dark. Her gaze, in particular, seemed to devour him alive. Your Majesty, I accuse Theon Greyjoy of conspiracy. He has secretly incorporated the gold cloaks into his own army and selected strong young men among the destitute to serve as soldiers. As expected, Janos Slynt was the first to move against Theon. Theon immediately knew Cersei was behind this. Slynt would never have dared to provoke him on his own. He was the typical villain who relied on powerful patrons to bully those beneath him. Faced with a lord commanding 6,000 men, Slynt would never act without Cersei's orders. To put it bluntly, nearly 70% of King's Landing's military power now rested in Theon's hands. Theon feared no one. Your Majesty, I received your permission to expand the army in King's Landing, but those gold cloaks joined me of their own free will. He rose to his feet and thundered. Janos Slynt, you take bribes, you buy and sell offices, and you force the gold cloaks to surrender half their wages to you. Is this the kind of man who deserves to command the city watch? Your Majesty, imagine your 2 treacherous uncles leading tens of thousands of men against King's Landing, while the soldiers who defend you are denied their full wages. How much willpower would they have left to fight for you? Joffrey panicked at Theon's words and turned his cruel, undisguised gaze upon Janos Slynt. Slynt immediately broke into a cold sweat and looked to Cersei for help. Although helpless, Cersei had to find a way to save him. If Slynt died, the remaining gold cloaks would almost certainly fall under Theon's command. Your Majesty, Cersei counseled swiftly, Slynt helped you suppress Ned Stark's rebellion. His merits and crimes balance each other. This is a delicate moment, it is not wise to execute him now. Better to wait until your grandfather has crushed the rebellion. Cersei's words still carried weight with Joffrey. So long as he was not openly defied, matters rarely turned against her. In the end, Joffrey looked at Slynt with obvious reluctance, already plotting how he might torment the man later. Yet he could not shake the sense that Theon's warning was correct. In his mind's eye, he saw his uncle storming King's Landing and hacking off his head. Theon spoke no further and returned to his seat in silence. For a long moment, the council chamber was hushed, until Grand Maester Pycelle, trembling, produced a letter. News has arrived from the wall in the north, he quavered. The wildlings have begun gathering for unknown reasons, and King's Landing is being asked to provide supplies and manpower. Theon curled his lip at Pycelle. The man was clearly vigorous enough to keep women in his bed, yet pretended to be nothing but frail and decrepit. In the original accounts, when Tyrion captured him, he had been caught in the arms of a woman. A fool, through and through. How can we possibly help them now? Joffrey snapped. Their king is a prisoner here in King's Landing, and they dare demand reinforcements and provisions, even with the mighty wall to protect them. Unlike in the original tale, Joffrey was now far more aware of his precarious position. Theon's constant threats had driven the point home. He was deeply unsettled by this new reality, and he had even begun to spend less time tormenting others. But he had grown far more irritable. Now, Joffrey executed servants for the smallest mistakes. At least their deaths came swiftly, whether that was fortune or misfortune remained unclear. Chapter 14. In the end, the North's request for aid from the wall was postponed. Faced with Joffrey's fury, no one dared to get involved. 3 days later, the 200,000 gold dragons promised by Petyr Baelish were delivered to Theon. Theon kept half and secretly sent it back to the Iron Islands overnight. Of the remaining 100,000, 90,000 were spent on weapons and armor, simple gear of leather and spears. Still, it was better than holding a pitchfork. Even so, nearly 1,000 men were left without proper arms or protection. To be honest, the television series Theon had watched contained many flaws. For instance, in the original show, the North looked like a band of beggars. Even Robb Stark, the king in the North, was poorly dressed. Not to mention the northern soldiers, who appeared ragged, and Winterfell, which looked more like a village council hall than the stronghold of a great house. But here, Winterfell was vast, standing as the capital of the North. As for the true northern soldiers, it was hard to judge, so Theon could only make the best preparations possible. He planned to exchange the remaining 10,000 gold dragons for 100,000 silver stags to pay his troops. 3 silver coins per month for a common soldier was an extraordinarily high wage. After all, aside from the standing garrison in King's Landing, most lords didn't pay their soldiers in wartime. At best, they provided a little food and fodder. Some men-at-arms even had to bring their own supplies when they marched. But in war, what you could seize was yours to keep. Like much of Westeros, they fought and plundered in equal measure. Still, in King's Landing, a lean camel is larger than a horse. Though the crown was drowning in debt, the granaries were well stocked after the harvest. By now, Theon had firmly secured his position. Especially after distributing silver to the troops, he won their loyalty. His next step was to replace the real with the false and find a way to smuggle all the grain and supplies from King's Landing back to his base. A week later, sudden news came from the front. Lord Tywin Lannister's host had been repeatedly ambushed and was suffering heavy losses. Even Jaime had been captured. When word reached King's Landing, it was quickly suppressed. That damned northerner actually defeated my grandfather in the field. Can someone explain what is happening? Joffrey flew into a rage, and the more furious he became, the clearer it was to Theon that he was afraid. Theon was deeply satisfied as he studied Joffrey, who resembled his original self yet seemed different in many ways. It was good for him to fear death. Only a king who understood fear could ever hope to rule well. Everyone lowered their heads in silence. The defeat at the front lines was, without a doubt, the worst news they could have received. Your Grace, allow me to take 5,000 men to the front to provide support. More than 4,000 will remain in King's Landing to defend the city. Theon seized the moment and said. No. You cannot leave. You must stay here and defend King's Landing for me, you cannot go. Joffrey shouted furiously. The others turned their eyes toward Theon, astonished. In their view, Theon had already secured his position firmly in King's Landing. With 6,000 men under his command, his contribution was undeniable, so long as he could hold the city. Leaving for the front now was a thankless and perilous task. Your Grace, Stannis and Renly are not on good terms and may even go to war with one another first. But the North is marching straight toward King's Landing. At Theon's words, Joffrey slammed his wine cup down so hard it shattered. When will you return? If you take 5,000 men, only 4,000 will remain in King's Landing. It will not be long, Your Grace. I will return as soon as the situation at the front is stabilized. In the end, Joffrey allowed Theon to march north. After all, the northern host was advancing directly toward the capital. Once granted permission, Theon immediately began his preparations. Taking advantage of the opportunity, he ensured that most of the cunning and untrustworthy men were among those he left behind. Food and fodder were then transported out of the city. Not all of it could be moved, but securing 2/3 of the provisions was still a considerable gain. That would be enough to sustain the Iron Islands for an entire year. Theon summoned Andrik Harlaw, a powerful lord of the Iron Islands. Andrik, we have rations left for only 5 days. Take 500 men and transport the rest back to Pike. Andrik immediately pledged to return the supplies safely to Pike. Though he had spent his life plundering the borders, never before had he seized so much food within King's Landing. Lord Theon, you are truly remarkable. I, Andrik, am thoroughly convinced. Theon waved dismissively. Many in King's Landing know what I am doing, Cersei, Varys, Baelish, but my strength keeps them silent. Theon understood well that moving 2/3 of King's Landing's supplies could not be hidden from such shrewd figures. Yet on one hand, he was marching to the front to support the Westerland's army, though in truth, he intended to plunder. On the other hand, many were eager to see him gone so that King's Landing might return to its usual political order. Most of all, Cersei Lannister likely longed for his departure. As for the Goldcloaks, their numbers could easily be replenished to 5,000, or even expanded to 6,000 or 7,000 if needed. All they required was food for one full meal each day, a difficult task amid the flood of war refugees. Perhaps Joffrey was the only one in King's Landing who truly did not want Theon to leave. But Theon had no intention of returning. King's Landing was a vortex of power, riddled with problems. This time, Theon had expanded his army to 5,000, seized vast quantities of provisions, and obtained 200,000 gold dragons, all without cost. Chapter 15. Chapter size, 1,200 words. The camp stretched as far as the eye could see, alive with chaotic noise. The cries of prostitutes and the haggling of merchants rose and fell, mingling with the curses of soldiers. Tywin Lannister, a legendary figure in the West. If Joffrey's mother, Cersei, was guilty of lust in the original tale, then Joffrey's grandfather, Tywin Lannister, was guilty beyond doubt of pride. When still young, Tywin inherited the chaos left behind by his father, as the Lannisters, the Wardens of the West, had begun to wane. Two ancient houses of the Westerlands tried to supplant him, but the young Tywin crushed them with ruthless force. Their lands were seized, their families annihilated. The reigns of Castamere spread thereafter, proclaiming the majesty of House Lannister. From that time, the Lannisters grew ever stronger, becoming unrivaled in the West. Tywin demanded that the noble houses send retainers to serve at Castle Rock. He also used the family's immense wealth to allow lords to train their household soldiers on occasion. It could be said that the Westerlands had already become a centralized realm. This was one reason for Tywin's pride. During the War of the Five Kings, he seemed to take none of the other realms seriously. Yet Tywin was not a mere arrogance incarnate. At least in the show, the Westerland's army bore matching armor and arms, unlike the northern host, where many farmers marched to war carrying little more than pitchforks. Your Excellency, my Lord Duke, reinforcements have arrived from King's Landing. Tywin lifted his gaze from the corpses he had been inspecting. Reinforcements. From King's Landing. His voice was laced with doubt. Were there truly reinforcements to be had from the capital now? He names himself Theon Greyjoy, Lord of the Iron Islands. At this, Tywin frowned, even more perplexed. Was not the Lord of the Iron Islands still that old Reaver, Balon? Wiping blood from his hands, Tywin asked, where is he now? Outside the camp, my lord. Bring him to me, Tywin commanded. At that moment, Theon stood on the edge of the camp, surveying the disorganized host. A flicker of emotion stirred within him, and he fancied he could still hear the faint cry of a woman in his ears. Lord Theon, please follow me. Lord Tywin awaits you, said the soldier with great respect. Soon, escorted by guards, Theon entered a vast command tent. Inside, Tywin Lannister sat upon the chief seat. The aura of a man long accustomed to command was unmistakable. Greetings, Lord Tywin, Theon began. But he was no longer as meek and deferential as he had been in King's Landing. Those days were past, he now possessed wealth and provisions. Tywin narrowed his eyes at him. Theon Greyjoy, son of Balon. If memory serves, you were once fostered by Ned Stark. And you claim you've come to aid me. Tywin's tone made clear he did not believe a word. Theon smirked carelessly. That depends on how many gold dragons Lord Tywin is willing to pay. I've heard it said your shit is made of gold. Hearing Theon's words, Tywin replied, how many men did you bring? 5,000, all elite infantry. Theon was not exaggerating. In Westeros, 5,000 men properly equipped with leather armor and decent weapons could indeed be called elite. Tywin began to consider whether hiring Theon to fight for him might be worthwhile. Of course, Theon was every bit as ambitious as his father, Balon, but far more cunning. Theon now styled himself Lord of the Iron Islands, and it was likely that Balon had met with an accidental death. Seeing Tywin still hesitate, Theon pressed, Roose Bolton can hold him with 18,000 men. I can hold him with 5,000. What do you want? Gold, or something else? Tywin finally asked. Riverrun. And the lands around it, including Seaguard and Stonehenge. Theon declared his demand. Seaguard stood upon the coast, along the Green Fork of the Trident. The Green Fork ran straight into the Bay of Crabs, providing a waterway across Westeros and facilitating trade with Essos through the narrow sea. As for Stonehenge and Riverrun, they were desired mainly for defense, against both northern and western incursions. Yes, Riverrun is currently besieged by the Young Wolf. Stonehenge and Seaguard lie north of the Riverlands. Seaguard in particular is close to the Twins. If you can seize them, they are yours. Tywin's words were almost dismissive, for Theon had only 5,000 men. How could it be so simple to capture 3 strongholds, each distant from the others? Very well, but you must also provide me with some warhorses and arms, Theon bargained. Tywin understood Theon's ambition clearly, but both men were using one another. In the end, Tywin supplied 500 warhorses and 1,000 suits of arms and armor, an invaluable gift. In the impoverished Iron Islands, warhorses were a rare treasure indeed. Thus, the two struck a preliminary accord. Tywin would provide equipment, while Theon promised to create chaos on the battlefield. Back in his quarters, Theon eagerly unfolded a map. His desire for Riverrun, Seaguard, and Stonehenge was no bluff. Riverrun had already been besieged by Jaime Lannister. Edmure Tully himself had been captured. But to surround Riverrun, Jaime had divided his force of 30,000 into 3 camps. Later, Robb Stark sent Roose Bolton with 18,000 infantry to Harrenhal as a decoy, to draw Tywin's attention. Meanwhile, Robb led 6,000 cavalry in a surprise assault, not only freeing his uncle Edmure but also capturing Jaime Lannister. At that same time, Joffrey executed Ned Stark, Arya Stark vanished, and only Sansa remained as a hostage in King's Landing. This sudden reversal left Tywin on the defensive. Yet the old lion remained unshaken, calm even in adversity. Studying Riverrun on the map, Theon contemplated his strategy. After retaking Riverrun, Robb could not remain there long. He would surely seek another chance to strike at Tywin's army. Even if Jaime's camp had been defeated, Tywin still commanded 20,000 men. Against Tywin's nearly 50,000 soldiers, the North's 24,000 could not win a pitched battle. Robb would inevitably turn to ambush and maneuver to bleed Tywin. For now, Tywin remained entrenched at Harrenhal with 30,000 men, while nearly 20,000 more guarded the Golden Tooth, ensuring Robb could not strike the Lannisters' ancestral stronghold. Theon then ordered his men to march toward Riverrun. When Robb appeared at the front lines, Theon planned to seize Riverrun for himself. Shortly after Theon's departure, Arya Stark entered Tywin's service as his cupbearer. When she learned that Theon had just arrived, she cursed him as a traitor, adding his name to her list of those marked for death. Chapter 16. Suddenly, a host of nearly 10,000 appeared not far from Harrenhal. At its head rode Tyrion. Soon he was face to face with his father. 10,000 clansmen from the Mountains of the Moon. I gathered them on my way here. Tyrion's tone brimmed with pride, straining to impress Tywin. Pouring himself a cup of wine, Tyrion asked, "So, who are we fighting now?" "The North. I narrowly escaped them." Tyrion had no knowledge of recent events in King's Landing. He still believed that Catelyn Stark had captured him, sparking the conflict between North and West. "Robert is dead, slain by a boar's tusks." Tyrion took a sip of wine. "My sister must be delighted. Ned Stark has been executed for treason, by Joffrey's command." The crash of breaking glass followed as Tyrion dropped his cup. "What? In the name of the Seven, Ned? Treason?" His voice rang with disbelief. Tywin then gave his son a brief account of what had transpired. Tyrion could only sigh at how much his sister doted upon Joffrey. No sane person, he thought, would have done such a thing. Tywin had raised nearly 60,000 men in total, entrusting 30,000 to Jaime. Yet 10,000 of them had been defeated, and Jaime captured. The blow to Tywin's bannermen was severe. Fortune, however, had brought Tyrion back with 10,000 clansmen. Tywin told him that his promise would not be taken lightly, and that the terms offered to Tyrion would be far more generous than those granted to Theon. Shaga, the mountain clan's leader, insisted that Halfman must fight beside them. Tyrion readily agreed. With the clans now under his command, Tywin resolved to take the offensive against the north. In the original tale, Jaime's capture occurred shortly after Tyrion's return. But this time, Tyrion had arrived later, for reasons unknown. While events unfolded there, Theon was hardly idle. He had stationed his men a safe distance from Riverrun, continuing to spy on the castle. Along the way, his scouts encountered scattered bands of defeated soldiers from both the western and northern fronts. My lord, Sir Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, remains the sole commander holding Riverrun. There are at least 4,000 men inside the walls. Robb Stark has withdrawn. Theon narrowed his eyes at the report. Riverrun was a fortress without equal. Though the riverlands themselves offered little natural defense, Riverrun stood as a barrier unto itself. The castle sat in a triangle at the confluence of the Tumblestone and the Red Fork, surrounded by water on 3 sides. Only 3 drawbridges linked it to land, and once raised, Riverrun became an island. Were it not for Edmure's eagerness for glory, Jaime would have had little chance of taking it. Likewise, if Theon attempted an assault now, he could never hope to succeed. Such an attack would only bleed his men. Unless the drawbridge were lowered from within, there was no way into the city. Turning the thought over in his mind, Theon devised a plan. By now, Robb must surely have learned that Theon was no ally. Gaining entrance openly was impossible. The only chance was to slip inside and find a moment to lower the bridge. Theon led 5,000 men, marching swiftly toward Riverrun. Once his plan was confirmed, he no longer bothered to conceal the trail of his host, advancing openly and deliberately. Soon, 5,000 Ironborn stood arrayed outside Riverrun, their banners of the Kraken flying high. Theon crossed the stone causeway alone, approaching the fortress. The causeway ended abruptly several meters from the gates. To go further, the drawbridge had to be lowered. With a creak of chains, the bridge descended. Out rode Sir Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, his wounds still visibly unhealed. Theon Greyjoy, I know you, traitor. The Blackfish spat. You are nothing but a craven flatterer, more contemptible than your father, Balon, for at least he never bent the knee to the Iron Throne. Theon smiled. Then my father rebelled and perished for it. My brothers died with him. Yet here I stand, alive. The stores of Riverrun will last another year. I hope you can endure as long. With that, Brynden turned his back, unwilling to waste further words on Theon. Theon watched silently as the drawbridge rose again and the towering walls of Riverrun loomed above. He gave a slight nod and returned to his camp. That night, he took up a grappling hook and rowed alone in a small boat toward Riverrun's southern drawbridge, where the guards were fewer. It would be the surest path for his men to enter once inside. Brynden would never imagine that Theon would attempt to scale Riverrun's walls by himself. At the base of the fortress, his shadow flickered in the moonlight. In moments, Theon clambered to the top of the wall. The guards on watch spotted the armored intruder and immediately sounded the war horn. Outside, the Ironborn nobles wiped cold sweat from their brows, praying fervently. They had never wanted Theon to take such a risk alone. Yet after what he had accomplished in King's Landing, none dared forbid him. On the wall, Theon vaulted down toward the drawbridge's inner mechanism. With a sweep of his sword, he severed the thick rope. The soldiers gaped as he leapt from a height of 15 meters. Is he mad? Suicidal? But the thunderous crash of the collapsing drawbridge jolted them from their stupor. They rushed down the stairs, only to find Theon already standing beneath, clutching his blade. At the sound, the Ironborn outside surged forward, storming across the fallen bridge. Theon cut down the 5 guards stationed there, but the horn's cry had roused the garrison. More and more men began to converge upon him. Chapter 17. Observing the growing number of enemies, Theon did not panic. Fire! With that command, arrows flew toward him. With a sharp crack, every arrow ricocheted and scattered across the ground. Wildanon was stunned. He had never heard of armor so indestructible within the 7 kingdoms. Who are you? Wildanon shouted angrily, though the outburst eased his fear, if only slightly. Theon raised his sword. I am Theon Greyjoy, King of the Iron Islands, Lord of the Seas, a phantom in the mists, a monster from the depths. When it came to names and titles, Theon knew the rule well. If you couldn't rattle off a string of impressive titles, you were nobody. Look at Daenerys, her list of titles was endless. Theon, you treacherous squid. Robb himself will cut off your head. The voice of Brynden Tully rang out, his eyes wide, as if he were about to devour a grilled squid. At that moment, Theon's army surged forward. "Your Grace, are you unharmed?" Tim Joff asked with concern. But Tim's worries were clearly unnecessary. To pierce the armor, one would need at least a Valyrian steel crossbow capable of slaying dragons. Theon leveled his sword and shouted, "Crush them! Any who resist shall be slain at once." Tim Joff drew his blade. "Kill!" The troops charged in chaos. Theon sighed deeply at the sight. This was far from the disciplined army he had envisioned. They simply rushed forward without order. If not for their nearly identical uniforms and the rags tied around their arms, Theon might have doubted they were his men at all. The cries of the wounded and the dying echoed through Riverrun. Fortunately, Brynden the Blackfish quickly rallied his troops, sparing Theon from further disorder. 5,000 against 4,000, hardly an overwhelming advantage. Yet with Theon's newly formed light cavalry of 500 and their flawless armor, the balance shifted swiftly. Especially Theon himself, mounted on a warhorse and wielding a spear, he was terrifying enough to shatter the enemy's will. The 500 riders under his command tore through Riverrun's defenders like a blade through flesh. It wasn't long before the remaining defenders scattered in all directions. Theon led his cavalry in plundering and killing nobles wherever they could find them, the more, the better. By dawn, Riverrun's drawbridge had risen once again, as if nothing had happened. Only the bloodstains and the ashes of war whispered of the massacre that had taken place the night before. Fortunately for his men, Theon paid them silver coins each month and did not demand that they supply their own provisions. This spared the civilians of Riverrun from humiliation and gave them a measure of relief. The bodies of Brynden Tully and several other nobles were cremated together and buried in a cemetery outside the city. Theon's actions earned him considerable respect. Of course, he also made sure his men spread word of his deeds throughout Riverrun. It was also publicized that Theon had ordered his soldiers not to harass the townsfolk during the previous night, and had even executed several Ironborn nobles who disobeyed. "Tim, take your men and plunder the noble estates. Then, set aside a portion of the spoils for the common folk. The rest will be divided among the soldiers." "Huh, why should we give any of it to the civilians?" Tim asked, confused. He knew well enough that Theon was not the just and honorable man the people outside believed him to be. "It's just for show, so we can win their hearts and recruit more men." Tim immediately began leading men to ransack the houses, one after another, a task that lasted an entire day. It must be said, these noble families were truly wealthy. Though the full tally had not yet been counted, the loot was worth at least 600,000 gold coins. And this was only the wealth contained in Riverrun itself, not including that of their fiefs and castles. Most nobles owned estates and strongholds elsewhere. Their mansions in Riverrun were little more than temporary residences. Even so, Theon was shocked by Riverrun's abundance. The warehouses and cellars overflowed with provisions. No wonder Brynden had confidently claimed he could withstand a siege for a year. Riverrun had little coin compared to its vast food stores, and much of that coin was meant to purchase more supplies. This suited Theon well, though he regretted that Brynden Tully had not been taken alive. The old man had courage, he preferred to die in battle rather than surrender. After seizing Riverrun, Theon turned his attention to the city's remaining nobility. Through a mixture of coercion and persuasion, he secured the loyalty of a handful of minor lords, granting them small military commands ranging from a few men to several dozen, charged with keeping order in the city. Meanwhile, a group of disobedient nobles was stripped of all military authority, and their retainers dismissed. Every weapon and piece of armor was confiscated. This group numbered no more than 600. After all, most of the rebellious nobles had been slain by Theon the night before. From the confiscated arms, Theon recruited 500 men from the civilian population, equipping them to form Riverrun's new garrison. Thus, 500 minor nobles and 500 commoners made up the city's guard. Theon intended to rely on Riverrun's ample supplies to properly train his new army. First, they would be drilled in marching and maneuvering, left, right, forward, back, and then, through posture, discipline, and physical training, they would be forged into something resembling an elite force. The garrison would undergo the same training, and civilians who performed well would be elevated as newly created nobles. Chapter 18. While Theon was busy drilling his army in Riverrun, the first direct clash between the Wolf of the North and the Lion of the West had come to an end. Tyrion wandered across the battlefield, watching the surviving soldiers cheerfully scavenge the dead. Perhaps the spoils they stripped from corpses were the only true reward they could claim. Upon returning to his father's tent, Tyrion found all the Western lords assembled. This is for you. Tywin handed him a sealed letter. Tyrion accepted it. What is this? He asked, curious. You will go to King's Landing as hand of the king in my stead. Once, we had 3 Stark hostages. Now only Sansa remains. There was a rare edge of anger in Tywin's voice, proof of how deeply he resented Cersei and Joffrey over the matter. Tyrion felt a flicker of pride. For the first time, his father's command seemed to recognize his worth. Why me? I mean, why not Uncle Kevin, or anyone else? Why me? His tone was disbelieving. Tywin poured Tyrion a goblet of red wine. Because you are my son. If your sister cannot, then you will. At that moment, Tyrion understood. This was his chance. Tywin did not yet know whether Jaime lived or died. If Jaime was lost, Tyrion would be the only son left. If Tyrion proved capable, his father might truly consider him. If not, Tywin would adopt a successor from Kevin's line. No one cared more for House Lannister than Tywin. His children, even himself, were nothing but instruments of the family's legacy. Tyrion studied the letter of appointment in his hand. When do I depart? Now. Draining his wine, Tyrion left at once, taking Bronn and a small escort with him as he departed Harrenhal. After Tyrion's departure, Tywin and his lords resumed their council of war. Robb Stark's strategies and tactics were undeniably advanced. Against his strange and unpredictable maneuvers, the Western host had suffered defeat after defeat. After joining forces with Roose Bolton, Robb pressed his campaign against Tywin across the Riverlands. Yet both sides faced the same enemy, time. To march south, the North had poured all its resources into the war effort. Even the harvests of grain went untended, vast fields of wheat rotted where they stood. The northern host raided and plundered across the Trident's lands, earning the hatred of local farmers. Many, driven to ruin, formed outlaw bands, turning to pillage themselves, preying on peasants and scattering patrols alike. This unrest grew ever more severe in the Riverlands, the most infamous of these groups calling themselves the Brotherhood Without Banners. Nor were they alone. Mercenaries roamed freely, and Esser Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, terrorized the countryside under Tywin's command. As a result, the northern army's opportunities for plunder dwindled. When provisions ran short, many of the bannermen who had come from afar drifted back to their homes. Likewise, the West not only had to contend with the North but also with Renly and Stannis pressing from the south. Even so, the North's plight was far worse. At that moment, a soldier entered and placed a letter in Tywin's hands. Tywin broke the seal of the letter and was immediately taken aback by its contents. The little sea monster has taken Riverrun. 7 hells, how did he do it? Riverrun had a garrison of at least 4,000 men and ample supplies, yet it had fallen with alarming speed. Kevan Lannister snatched the letter and read it carefully. It says here that Theon Greyjoy, wearing armor gifted by the drowned god, stormed Riverrun's gates alone. Kevan scoffed. Who could believe such nonsense? Perhaps I should ask the smith to forge me a lion's armor as well. The Tullys are utterly worthless, Kevan added bitterly. Edmure ruined the Riverlands, and now his uncle has lost Riverrun itself. Tywin's expression was equally grim. Theon's victory was certainly no boon for him. In his plans, he had promised Riverrun, Seaguard, and Stonehenge to Theon. But he had never believed that the 5,000 men under Theon's command could seize any stronghold. It was a promise Tywin had made with full confidence, assuming Theon's efforts would collapse in failure. Yet the drawn-out war Tywin anticipated never came. Instead, Riverrun had fallen swiftly. Send word to Robb Stark. At least Theon is not yet our enemy. If Riverrun is lost, it is Stark who suffers most. He will be far more troubled than we. Tywin immediately dispatched a messenger to Robb. The most vital crossing for Robb's march south had been seized by the Ironborn. Tywin knew this news would deny the young wolf sleep, perhaps even distracting him into whispering sweet words to his little nursemaid. But Robb was far more enraged than Tywin had guessed. I treated him as a brother. My father never wronged him. Yet he betrayed my father, who was executed. I will kill him with my own hands, wherever he may be. At first, Robb had doubted Tywin's letter. He believed Theon lacked the skill to pull off such a feat, and more importantly, he could not believe that Theon would betray him. Fetch Lord Bolton. I must speak with him, Robb told his squire. Roose Bolton was one of the few northerners Robb trusted to command an army on his own. The old lord was still more than capable in the field. What does your grace require of me? Roose asked bluntly when he entered. Theon Greyjoy launched a surprise assault on Riverrun, and the castle has fallen. I will lead my men to retake it. I need you to hold Tywin here. Roose pursed his lips. Your Grace, we must move quickly. Our supplies are running low. I will return soon, and I will cut his head from his shoulders myself, Robb replied with confidence. At that moment, the young healer, Talisa, entered the tent. Roose Bolton turned silently and withdrew without another word. Outside, he glanced at the great direwolf banner snapping in the wind and walked away, something unreadable in his expression. Chapter 19. At dusk, crimson light spread across the desert sky as clouds gathered on the horizon. Even as night fell, the heat of the red waste lingered, heavy with the stench of sulfur. Daenerys and her company had reached their limit. Looking at Drogon perched upon her shoulder, Dany felt a wave of despair. She had been filled with joy when she first gained her 3 dragons, but now the cruel wasteland had nearly broken them. They were weak, and she did not even know what they were meant to eat. Even her own people struggled to find food and water. After a long night, Daenerys ordered her 3 blood riders to mount the last surviving horses and ride in 3 different directions. Their survival would depend on whether any of them could find a town or village. Dany sank to the ground, drinking the final drop of water before licking her cracked lips. Will we ever escape this red hell? She whispered, despair thick in her voice. You are the hope of all. You are the mother of dragons. We will find a way, Jorah Mormont answered firmly. Daenerys looked at the 3 hatchlings inside their wooden cage and felt a flicker of hope return. Just then, a horse appeared on the horizon. Jorah went to investigate, only to find the severed head of a blood rider tied to the saddle. It seems we've crossed paths with another Khalasar, Jorah said grimly. Dany took the head into her hands, her tone filled with grief and anger. They will pay. I will make them pay. Of course, Jorah replied, but first, we must live long enough to take our vengeance. At her command, Jorah burned the Bloodrider's head, a sacred Dothraki tradition, so the warrior might ride with Khal Drogo in the Night Lands. 2 days later, the Blood Riders who had gone south returned with hopeful news. A great trading city lay 3 days' march to the south, willing to grant them entry. Daenerys's heart leapt, and she immediately led her people toward salvation. The 3-day journey became 4, and they arrived utterly exhausted. When the golden walls of Qarth finally came into view, adorned with carvings of flying fish and strange beasts, Daenerys felt a surge of relief. Qarth stood in the southeast of Essos, a wealthy port that bridged trade between the east and west. Though the city is nominally ruled by a royal family, true power lies with 13 merchant princes, each as rich as a kingdom, Jorah explained. With a deep rumble, Qarth's gates opened. First came a company of guards, followed by the so-called 13, the city's true rulers. Daenerys stepped forward. I am Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen. Stormborn. I know you, Daenerys Targaryen, mother of dragons. Welcome to Qarth, the greatest city in the world. A fat merchant interrupted her introduction. Dany was taken aback. My lord, you know me. Ah, not a lord. Merely a humble spice trader. I do not know you, but I have heard whispers. Some say you are a true dragon, and that you have given birth to 3 beasts who can conquer the world. Forgive our ignorance, but will you allow us a glimpse of your children? Daenerys and Jorah exchanged a wary look. My friend, she said carefully, my people and I have suffered long on this journey. We have neither food nor water. If you would give us sustenance, I would be grateful beyond words. Pardon me, mother of dragons, the pale, heavy-set man cut her off, stressing the title with deliberate weight. I am not certain your children even exist. I only wish to see proof. After all, your followers are Dothraki, you understand what I mean. Dany's face hardened with anger. I do not lie. Of course, the merchant said smoothly. I do not doubt you. But this is our first meeting. My companions are not so easily convinced. He gestured toward the 12 others. Daenerys gave a bitter laugh. In my homeland, guests are welcomed into palaces with honor. They are not humiliated outside the gates. Then perhaps you should return to your homeland and let its people welcome you, and your children, the fat man sneered. After saying this, the fat merchant turned and walked away. Who would care about the remnants of a fallen dynasty in Westeros? Only a beggar princess. And now, a beggar Khaleesi. Daenerys's chest heaved with anger. You promised to receive us, yet now you cast us aside. The fat man turned back with a blank expression. And now that you and I stand together, is that not a reception? If we cannot enter the city, my people and I will starve to death outside these walls. She cried. A shame, the merchant sneered, but I will not allow a horde of Dothraki savages inside the city. His face twisted with disgust. Then he smiled coldly, gave her a mocking wave, and turned away. Daenerys's face flushed with fury. My lord, when my children grow, they will help me reclaim all that is mine, and destroy those who have wronged me. Flames shall sweep the land, and fire shall devour the city. Whoever bars me at these gates shall be the first to burn in dragonfire. At her words, Jorah's hand drifted instinctively to the hilt of his sword. But the fat merchant burst out laughing. To him, Daenerys's threat was little more than a child's outburst. Ha! You are truly a Targaryen. But you are right about only one thing. If we do not admit you into this city, you and all your people will die. At that moment, another voice rang out. A tall, dark-skinned man of immense girth stepped forward. You tremble before a young girl and a few Dothraki. That is not the courage of a great ruler of Qarth. She threatens to burn my city, and you would still invite her in to drink. The spice merchant protested angrily. The black-skinned man, Xaro Exhoan Daxus, gave a derisive chuckle. Your city, Qarth, belongs to the 13, not to you alone. Though contempt lingered in his eyes, Xaro's lips curved into a gracious smile. I, Xaro Exhoan Daxus, invoke my rights as one of the 13 to grant protection to the noble mother of dragons. The spice merchant, the so-called pureborn, snarled in frustration but finally spat. Very well. Then the responsibility is yours, whatever comes of it. With a flourish, Xaro bowed and made a sweeping gesture. My lady, welcome to Qarth. The massive gates creaked open, and Daenerys Targaryen entered the free city known as the Gateway of the World. In an instant, a cacophony of voices, laughter, and cries filled her ears. Just a single wall divided her starving followers from the wealth of Qarth, yet it was the difference between hell and paradise. Chapter 20. As the war intensified, a great wave of refugees spread across the Seven Kingdoms. Many of them began to gather in King's Landing, swelling the city's population from over 400,000 to nearly 500,000. The most immediate impression upon entering King's Landing was the stench, stronger and more overwhelming than ever. The Red Keep Square. This was the great square of the Red Keep, overlooking the sea. Today was Joffrey's name day. The young king sat watching as the hound fought against a knight. Kill him, dog. Joffrey shouted with delight. The hound met his expectations, driving his sword through the knight and shoving him off the platform. Excited, Joffrey walked to the edge, peering down at the corpse below. Next time, find a stronger opponent for the dog, he commanded. Soon, a fat knight stumbled onto the stage. Joffrey frowned. Wait, have you been drinking? The knight froze, sweat beading on his brow. Forgive me, your grace. I was nervous and had 2 cups of wine. Joffrey nodded. That's fine, it is only natural. Then he turned to a guard, his eyes alight with mischief. Bring this knight 2 barrels of wine. Relief on the knight's face turned quickly to dread when he saw Joffrey's cruel smile. Let him drink his fill. Joffrey declared. No, your grace. Please, I swear I'll never drink again. The knight fell to his knees, begging for mercy. But Joffrey only grinned, enjoying the sight of men pleading before him. Nearby, Sansa forced a smile, watching as the knight vomited from being made to drink. Your grace, it is your name day. It would be terrible if someone were to die, she said gently. At that moment, a familiar voice rang out. Lady Sansa is right. It is, after all, your name day. Tyrion's voice carried from the distance. Joffrey scowled, glaring at his uncle as if to say, why in the 7 hells did you return? Ignoring him, Tyrion went to Sansa. I am sorry for what happened to your father, he said softly. Thank you, Lord Tyrion, Sansa replied, glancing nervously at Joffrey. But my father was a traitor, as were my mother and brother. I love my king with all my heart. Tyrion studied her with mild surprise, then moved on toward the council chamber. The small council. Inside, Cersei was gathered with Janos Slynt, Pycelle, Petyr Baelish, Varys, and others. As the sound of mocking whistles filled the air, Tyrion entered at a leisurely pace. He first kissed Cersei's cheek, then looked at her with a sly smile. Did you miss me, dear sister? What are you doing here? This is a royal meeting. Cersei snapped, struggling to keep her fury in check. Oh, I know very well this is a royal meeting, Tyrion replied, amused. And I also know my father's intentions. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a sealed letter, and handed it to Pycelle. The Grand Maester's hands trembled as he opened it. It reads, appoint Tyrion Lannister as Hand of the King in times of war. He passed the letter to Cersei. She read it in disbelief. Once certain the words were genuine, her face twisted with rage. Leave us. All of you. The others departed, hiding their satisfaction behind impassive expressions. They sensed entertainment ahead. Theon Greyjoy had just left, and now the new hand has arrived, one thought. This will be worth watching. Tyrion smirked. Father is very disappointed in you. Now, you are the child who brings him shame, not me. Cersei said nothing, just as she had not protested when Joffrey ordered Ned Stark's execution. My brother Jaime has been captured by the wolf pups, and now we don't know if he's alive or dead. We once had 3 Starks, but now only 2 girls remain, Tyrion complained to Cersei. 1. Tyrion suddenly raised his head. 1. He set down his cup. What did you say? 1. Cersei licked her lips. The youngest has vanished. Tyrion drew a long breath. You mean to say the little girl disappeared under the watch of a gold cloak? Our attention was fixed entirely on Theon Greyjoy at the time. He must have taken the youngest. Cersei declared, as if convinced Theon had spirited Arya away. Tyrion pressed her for details. When he heard Cersei's account, his eyes widened in disbelief. That Theon Greyjoy. He truly marched off with 2,500 men and 2/3 of King's Landing's grain, right under everyone's nose. Tyrion was half amused at the sheer incompetence surrounding Cersei and the council. He had never expected his nephew to trust anyone so blindly, least of all an ambitious schemer like Theon Greyjoy. Tyrion was certain that those in power had wanted to be rid of Theon quickly, that was the only reason he had managed to take so much so easily. Cersei, however, now regretted allowing Theon to leave with such provisions. A Lannister always pays her debts. He betrayed me, and I will make him pay. Tyrion nodded slightly. Yes, you will make the Lord of the Iron Islands, commander of 5,000 seasoned warriors and the occupier of Riverrun, pay the price. He let out a weary sigh. But what we should truly be considering now is Renly and Stannis in the south, don't you think? Cersei picked up a letter and handed it to him. Renly is dead. Murdered in his own tent. They say it was his sworn shield, Brienne, who did it. Tyrion opened the letter, scanned its contents, and frowned, lost in thought. With Renly gone, the Reach would likely return to neutrality. Stannis would be the greatest beneficiary, and he would certainly not waste the chance to claim the strength of the Stormlands. This development was both good and bad for King's Landing. Had Renly lived, the city would have faced a southern host of 100,000 men, ready to march either on King's Landing itself or Dragonstone. But with Renly dead, the threat was reduced. Stannis could muster perhaps 30,000 men in a fleet. Given his character, he would sail directly for Blackwater Bay with the royal fleet. At last, Tyrion sighed, folded the letter, and left to find Shae. He returned to Shae's hidden chambers. While she was distracted, Tyrion slipped behind her, wrapped his arms around her hips, and pressed his face into the curve of her backside. Shae startled at the sudden embrace. Glancing back and seeing it was Tyrion, she exhaled in relief. Author's note. If you're enjoying the story and wish to support me, you can visit my PTR30N, where you can read 50+ extra chapters ahead. Thank you so much for your support. It means the world. Blue heart smile. PTR30N. DylanBriak.